Have you ever felt that spine-chilling sensation of being watched, even when you're alone at home? The kind of feeling that makes your skin crawl and your heart race for no reason? Imagine this. You're in the comfort of your own home, doors locked, lights dimmed, and yet something doesn't feel right. What if someone or something has been watching you this entire time? Tonight, we dive into true stories of terrifying encounters, stalkers that lurk in the shadows, and chilling experiences that will make you question your safety, even in your own house. These are not just stories. These are nightmares that turn real. Our first story begins with Emily, a young woman living in a quiet neighborhood. It was supposed to be a peaceful night. She had just moved into her new home, settling in with a cup of tea, when she began to feel it. The undeniable sensation that she wasn't alone. At first, it was subtle. Little noises, like footsteps echoing in the hallway when she was sure no one else was home. The creak of the floorboards, the faint sound of something scraping against the wall. Emily tried to ignore it. It's just the house settling, she told herself. But then it happened again and again until one evening she caught a glimpse of something through her window. Someone standing across the street, staring at her home. But when she looked away and then back again, they were gone. Terrified, Emily called the police, but when they arrived, they found nothing. No footprints, no sign of forced entry. It was as if the figure had never existed at all. But as the days went by, Emily started to notice more things. Her front door, always locked, was ajar, and sometimes things she didn't remember touching would be moved. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. One night, she heard a tapping at her window. Slowly, she turned to see the shadow of a figure standing outside in the dark. She froze, and just as quickly as it appeared, the shadow was gone. But something inside her knew this wasn't the first time. Someone had been watching her for weeks, and they knew she was alone. Let me take you back to a night that felt like any other, but quickly turned into a waking nightmare. Sarah was home alone. The house was quiet, and the only sound was the occasional creak of the floorboards. She had just finished dinner, settled in to watch her favorite show, and felt completely safe. But then the phone rang. Sarah picked it up, but there was no one on the other end. Silence. She hung up, dismissing it as a prank call. But the phone rang again. This time, she answered with a trembling hand. "Hello?" she asked, but all she heard was breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. Panic set in as she slammed the phone down, heart racing. She tried to shake off the feeling, but the hairs on the back of her neck stood up. Something was wrong. Minutes later, her phone buzzed again. Another call. This time, a voice whispered, "I'm outside." Frozen, Sarah's mind raced. Was someone really outside? She went to the window and peeked through the blinds, but saw nothing. Her front yard was empty, and the street was dark, with no sign of life. She breathed a sigh of relief, until she turned back to the door. The lock on her front door was turning. Her heart dropped into her stomach. The breathing on the other end of the phone had started again, more frantic this time, and it felt like it was coming from right behind her. With trembling hands, she reached her phone and realized it was still in her hand. The whisper came again, closer this time. "I'm inside." To this day, Sarah doesn't know how she made it through the night. The police found no evidence of anyone in the house, no signs of forced entry. But Sarah knew the truth. Sometimes the most terrifying monsters aren't the ones we can see, but the ones who know how to make us believe they're right behind us. Now, let me tell you about Mike. He was a young man, living alone in a small apartment on the edge of town. One night, he had just finished a long shift at work, and all he wanted was to relax and get some sleep. Little did he know that night was going to be anything but peaceful. He was lying in bed, eyes barely closed, when he heard the faintest sound, like a tap, tap, tap against the window. It wasn't loud enough to be alarming, but it was enough to make him pause and listen. At first, Mike dismissed it. Probably a tree branch swaying in the wind, he thought. But then it happened again. Tap, tap, tap. He sat up, staring at the window across the room. There was no tree outside, no branches swaying in the breeze. Mike felt the hairs on his arms stand up as his mind raced. He decided to check it out, convinced it was just his imagination playing tricks on him. As he walked toward the window, the tapping stopped. Silence. Mike pulled the curtain back, heart pounding in his chest. He saw nothing. The streetlights cast long shadows on the sidewalk, but there was no sign of movement. He let out a sigh of relief, but just as he turned away, he heard it. "Mike!" The voice was faint, barely a whisper, but it came from outside. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. No one should have known his name. Mike rushed to the door, checked the locks. Everything was secure. He thought about calling the police, but felt a strange sense of dread creeping up his spine. What could he tell them? That someone was whispering his name outside his window? He didn't sleep that night. And the next morning, when he checked his window, he found a note pressed between the glass. It read, "I know you're alone. I'll be back." Mike never saw anyone outside his window again. But every time he looks out into the dark, he feels like someone's watching, waiting. And every tap, every shadow makes him wonder who's really out there. Now, let me tell you about Laura. Laura had always been the type to love living alone. She enjoyed the peace and quiet of her apartment, the solitude that allowed her to focus on her work and hobbies. But one night, everything changed. It was a Friday evening, and she had just gotten back from a late dinner with friends. Tired, she locked the door behind her, turned off the lights, and collapsed onto her couch, scrolling through her phone as the evening slipped into night. It was getting late, so she decided to call it a night. As she headed to her bedroom, she heard something strange, a soft tapping sound coming from the bathroom, just down the hall. She paused, confused. It was too quiet to be anything more than her imagination, but there it was again. Tap, tap, tap. Laura shook her head, telling herself it was just the pipes or a loose window. She shrugged it off and went to bed, hoping for a peaceful night's sleep, but that peace would never come. Around 2 a.m., she was jolted awake by the sound of the tapping once again. But this time it was louder, more insistent, as though something was trying to get her attention. She could feel her heart begin to race. The tapping came from the bathroom, but now it was accompanied by a low, guttural whisper. "I'm here, Laura." She froze, her pulse hammering in her ears. The whisper sounded too close, too real. She hesitated for a long moment before getting out of bed. Her legs were weak with fear, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Slowly, she crept down the hallway toward the bathroom. The door was slightly ajar. The light from the hallway cast long, eerie shadows across the floor. She pushed it open, but the room was empty, just as it should have been. But when she turned to leave, she noticed something in the mirror. There, written in what looked like fog, were the words, "I'm already inside." Terrified, Laura ran out of the bathroom, slamming the door behind her. She checked every lock, every window, but nothing felt safe. Something had crossed the line, something that shouldn't have been there. And that night, she didn't sleep a wink. To this day, Laura can't explain what happened. She moved out of that apartment, but sometimes, when she's alone at night, she still hears that tapping. And she can't help but wonder, was something truly in the bathroom that night? Or was it something else, waiting for her to let it in? Now, let's talk about Julia. Julia lived in a small, quiet neighborhood, far from the chaos of the city. It was a kind of place where everyone knew each other, and you could walk down the street without ever feeling unsafe. At least, that's what Julia thought, until one fateful evening. She had just returned from a late shift at the hospital, tired and ready for a peaceful night of rest. The streets were empty, save for the occasional car passing by. As she entered her home, she felt the familiar comfort of her routine settle in, lock the door, change into pajamas, and sit down to unwind. But something was different that night. Something she couldn't put her finger on. She sat on the couch, tried to relax, but the feeling of being watched never left her. Her eyes constantly flicked to the windows, the door, as if expecting someone to be there. Her instincts were on high alert, but she couldn't explain why. Around midnight, her phone buzzed with a message. It was a number she didn't recognize. "I'm watching you." Julia's heart skipped a beat. She checked the message again, convinced she had made a mistake. But the number was unfamiliar, and the message was chilling. She didn't respond, thinking it was a prank or some sort of wrong number. But then, the messages started coming faster, one after the other. "I see you through the window. You can't hide. I know everything about you." Terrified, Julia rushed to the windows and checked the street. Nothing. No one was there. Her hands trembled as she locked the doors and closed the blinds. But as she walked back into the living room, the lights flickered. Then the power went out entirely. Her phone buzzed again, and she saw a new message, this time with a photo attached. It was a picture of her, sitting on the couch, taken from outside the window. Her breath caught in her throat. She checked the blinds again. Nothing. No one outside. No one could have taken that picture. She called the police immediately, but by the time they arrived, everything seemed normal. The doors were locked, the windows were secure, and there were no signs of anyone outside. But Julia couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been in her home, someone who knew everything about her. The police could find no trace of the stalker, but Julia never felt safe again. Every time the lights flickered or her phone buzzed with an unknown number, she remembered that photo, and as she lay in bed at night, she would stare at the window, wondering, was she really alone, or was someone always watching, waiting for the right moment? Julia couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. No matter how many times she locked the doors or checked the windows, she felt like something or someone was still out there, lurking just beyond her view. The days went by, and the messages continued, growing more disturbing with each one. One night, she received a new text. This time, it wasn't a photo, but a simple, chilling sentence. "I'm closer than you think." Her heart pounded in her chest as she looked around the room, trying to make sense of the message. The lights flickered again, but this time they stayed dim. The house felt cold, much colder than usual. She wrapped herself in a blanket and tried to relax, but the fear was overwhelming. Something wasn't right. Later that evening, as Julia was preparing for bed, she heard a soft scraping sound coming from the hallway outside her bedroom door. It was faint, almost like a whisper, but it sent a shiver down her spine. She froze, listening intently. The sound stopped. Then she heard again, closer this time, like footsteps scraping along the floor. She grabbed her phone, ready to call the police. But before she could dial, the door to her bedroom creaked open. No one was there, but the door had opened. The sound had stopped. Everything was eerily still. Julia stood there for a moment, frozen in terror, before her phone buzzed again. She quickly checked the message, expecting another chilling line, but this time the message was different. It was a video, a short clip showing her own front door, slowly creaking open. The timestamp read 3:07 a.m., just moments before she had heard the scraping sound. The video was timestamped on her phone, taken just seconds ago. Her breath caught in her throat. The front door was locked. There was no way anyone could have opened it without her hearing it. Yet, the video clearly showed it opening by itself. What made it even worse was the soft sound in the background, a whisper that clearly said her name. "Julia, I'm in your house." The video ended abruptly, and the phone went black. Julia could hardly breathe. She was too terrified to move. The room felt colder, and the silence was unbearable. She could hear her own pulse thundering in her ears. In a panic, Julia ran to the living room and looked out the window, hoping to see anyone outside. But the street was empty. Nothing. No one. The lights were still flickering, and the air felt unnaturally cold. She thought about leaving, but fear kept her frozen in place. And then she heard it. The scraping sound again, this time directly behind her. She whipped around, her eyes wide with terror, but saw nothing. Just the dark corners of her home, empty and still. The fear was overwhelming, and the thought struck her. Was this all in her mind? Or had the person or thing who had been watching her finally made their move? That night, Julia locked herself in her bedroom and didn't sleep a wink. Every small sound made her heart race. She could hear footsteps in the hall, whispers in the walls, and a constant tapping that never seemed to end. But when the morning light finally came, she found something that would haunt her forever. The note slipped under her door. "You can't hide from me forever." Julia moved out the next day, leaving everything behind. She couldn't stay there any longer, but as she drove away, she looked at her phone once more. There, in her message inbox, was one final text. "I'm closer than you think, and I'm coming for you." She deleted the message, but as she looked out the window, she could have sworn she saw a shadow standing just across the street. And in that moment, she realized the nightmare wasn't over. It was only just beginning. Julia moved far away, to a new town, to a new life, or so she thought. The apartment she found was everything she wanted. Peaceful, quiet, and far from the chaos she had left behind. She felt safe again, away from the fear that had haunted her for so long. But every time she walked into a new room, every time she locked the door, she couldn't help but glance over her shoulder. Was she really free? One evening, as she was unpacking boxes, she found something unexpected hidden at the bottom of a bag. Something she didn't remember packing. It was a small, folded piece of paper. Her hands shook as she unfolded it. "I told you you can't hide from me. I'm always watching." The note was in the same handwriting, the same chilling message. But this time there was something more, a drawing, a crude, detailed sketch of Julia's new apartment, with a window facing the street and a shadowy figure standing just outside, peering in. Julia dropped the note, her heart pounding. She didn't know how it had gotten there, but she knew one thing for sure. This nightmare, the stalking, the fear, it had never really left her. The doorbell rang. Her body froze. She cautiously walked to the door, her pulse racing. She checked the peephole. No one was there, just a dark, empty hallway outside. She opened the door, and there was nothing, no one. But as she closed it, she caught a glimpse of something in the corner of her eye, a figure, standing just beyond her window, watching her from the shadows. The shadow didn't move, but Julia could feel it. She could feel it staring back at her. And in that moment, she knew whatever was following her, whatever had been watching her all this time, it wasn't just some person. It was something far worse, something that never let go, and it would never stop. The nightmare was far from over, and it would never end, not until it got what it wanted. And Julia had no idea what that was. Before we move on, I'm curious. Have any of the lights in your house flickered tonight? Did your phone screen dim for a second, or act like it caught some movement behind you? It's probably nothing. But this next story tends to wake up things that prefer to stay hidden. Night shifts in the hospital are different. The silence is thicker, the shadows longer, and the world outside fades into the distance. But it's not just the stillness that makes the night shift unsettling. It's what happens when the lights go down and the walls seem to whisper. Julie, a nurse who worked late shift for years, never thought she'd encounter something beyond explanation. But one night, she came face to face with a terror she couldn't escape. This is Julie's story. The story of the night she realized that some patients never truly leave. Story: the patient who never left. I have been working the night shift at St. Margaret Hospital for almost 3 years. It's the kind of place that's mostly quiet after hours, with only the hum of machines and the shuffle of footsteps echoing through the hallways. Most nights, it's routine medications, checkups, making sure the patients are comfortable. But then there was that night. It started out just like any other. I was assigned to the ICU, a floor that always felt cold even when the heat was turned up. The lights flickered above me as I made my rounds, checking on the patients who were deep in their sleep, some of them on ventilators, others unconscious. The monitors beeped quietly in the background, keeping rhythm with the silence. But as I passed room 303, I noticed something odd. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see a faint light coming from inside. I was sure I had closed it earlier. The patient in that room, Mr. Howard, had been in a coma for weeks after a car accident. There was no sign of improvement, and he hadn't shown any change in condition for days. I pushed the door open, and that's when I saw it. Mr. Howard was sitting up in bed. His eyes were wide open, staring ahead, and his breathing was steady, which was impossible. He had been unconscious for so long that the doctors had all but given up hope. But there he was, sitting straight up, looking as if he was waiting for something. I froze. There was no explanation. The room felt colder now, almost unnatural. I checked his pulse, nothing. I checked his vitals, nothing. But still, he was sitting there, his eyes fixed on the wall in front of him, unblinking. I tried to speak to him, to shake him out of whatever state he was in. "Mr. Howard, can you hear me?" He didn't move. His eyes stayed fixed, but there was no sign of recognition, no sign of life. His face was pale, and his skin had an unnatural, waxy sheen to it, like a mannequin's. I reached for the call button, but the moment I touched it, something strange happened. The monitors around his bed started to beep rapidly, and the lights overhead flickered violently. I stepped back, startled, and that's when I noticed something even worse. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move. They weren't like ordinary shadows. These ones twisted and stretched along the walls, curling around the bed, growing and shrinking as though they were alive, responding to Mr. Howard's presence. My heart raced, and I stumbled backward, my hand gripping the doorframe for support. That's when Mr. Howard moved. His head turned slowly toward me, and I swear I felt my blood run cold. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Then, in the silence, I heard it, a whisper, so faint that I wasn't sure if it was my imagination or something far darker. "Help me?" The voice was raspy, cracked, and it didn't sound like Mr. Howard at all. It sounded wrong. I took a step back, my breath shallow, and I reached for the door, ready to leave the room. But before I could turn the handle, I heard him speak again. "You shouldn't have come." The voice was clearer now, louder. And then, before I could react, the lights in the room went out completely, plunging me into darkness. The beeping of the monitors stopped, and the temperature in the room dropped suddenly, like I had walked into a tomb. I didn't wait for anything else. I ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. I could still hear his voice echoing in my mind. "You shouldn't have come." The next morning, the doctors were shocked when they found Mr. Howard exactly where I had left him, unconscious, hooked up to machines, just as he had been for weeks. There was no sign of any change. But I knew what I saw. That night, I never went back to room 303. And to this day, every time I walk down the hospital halls at night, I can't shake the feeling that someone is watching me from behind the doors, waiting for me to come closer. Mr. Howard's voice still lingers in my mind, a constant whisper I can't ignore. And I'll never forget the words he said, "You shouldn't have come." After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Howard. His body was still, but his eyes, they haunted me. They were so wide, so unblinking, as if he had seen something no one was supposed to see. But there was no way to explain it. The doctor said he was still in a coma, that there had been no changes in his condition. But I knew what I had seen. The next few shifts were torturous. I would walk past room 303, always feeling that icy chill crawl up my spine, as if someone was standing just behind the door, watching me. I tried to focus on my duties, to ignore the creeping dread that followed me through the hallways, but it wasn't easy. Every corner of the hospital seemed to be a reminder that night. Whispers in the dark, a shadow shifting just out of sight. Then it happened again. It was late one evening, well after midnight, when I was called to check on a new patient. The hospital was quieter than usual, almost too quiet. I walked through the empty corridors, the sound of my footsteps echoing in the stillness. As I passed by room 303, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The door was open. I knew it was locked earlier, locked tight, just as it had always been. But now, the door stood wide open, the light inside flickering like a faulty bulb. I stood frozen, my heart pounding in my chest. I couldn't bring myself to approach, but my feet moved on their own. I stepped into the room, my breath shallow, my eyes scanning the darkened corners. And then I heard it, a soft, barely audible whisper coming from the corner of the room. "Julie," my name. It was Mr. Howard's voice. I turned quickly, my eyes searching the shadows. But there was no sign of him. The bed was empty, the sheets crumpled and cold. But the air felt thick, heavy, like something was waiting, something unseen. "Julie, help me." This time, the voice was louder, and it wasn't just coming from the corner. It seemed to echo around the room, bouncing off the walls, the floor, the ceiling. The words were distorted, almost like someone was whispering through a wall, through the very fabric of the hospital itself. I stumbled back, my hands trembling as I reached for the door. The lights flickered again, and the temperature in the room dropped sharply, like the warmth had been sucked out of the air. And that's when I saw it, the shadow, It was standing at the foot of the bed, a tall, dark shape that stretched unnaturally across the room. The figure was indistinct, its features hidden in the darkness, but I could feel it. I could feel its eyes on me, like it was studying me, waiting for me to do something. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. "Julie, come closer," the voice whispered. "Help me, please." I tried to scream, but the words wouldn't come. I backed away, stumbling toward the door, but the figure didn't move. It just stood there, its presence pressing down on me, suffocating me. I couldn't escape it. The whispers grew louder, more frantic, as if the figure was calling me, pulling me into the darkness. I don't remember how I got out of the room. All I remember is running as fast as I could down the hall, the sound of the whispers still in my ears, still echoing in my mind. The next morning, I told the head nurse about what happened, but she just brushed it off, like I had imagined it. "Julie, you're working long shifts," she said. "It's probably just exhaustion. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. And I don't think I'll ever be able to forget the way Mr. Howard's voice sounded, begging for help, when he had no reason to speak. The thing is, I don't think it was him. I think something else is in that room, something that is pretending to be him. And every time I pass by room 303 now, I can feel it. I can feel the eyes watching me from the darkness inside. I hear the whispers, soft and persistent, calling my name. I don't know how long I can keep working here. I don't know how long I can ignore the shadows. All I know is that something in that room, something dark, is waiting for me, waiting for the next nurse to walk in and to never leave. The days after that night, I thought I was just imagining things, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Every time I walked down the ICU hallway, I couldn't help but glance toward room 303. It was always empty, the blinds drawn tight, the door closed, but something felt wrong. The air around that room was colder, thicker, like it had a presence that I couldn't escape. Then came the second incident. It was a week later. I was working another late shift, alone as usual. I was walking down the hall, heading toward the nurse's station when I heard something. A soft, rustling noise coming from the direction of room 303. It was so faint that at first I thought it was just the sound of the building settling. But as I walked closer, the noise grew louder, almost as if something or someone was moving inside. I stopped in front of the door. My hand hovered over the handle. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, but I couldn't explain why. I knew the room should be empty. Mr. Howard had been transferred to a different floor. There was no reason for the room to be occupied, but the rustling continued, almost like sheets being tugged, like someone was shifting in bed. I took a deep breath, convincing myself it was nothing. I turned the handle and pushed the door open. The room was dark, the only light coming from the faint glow of the nightlight by the bed. But when I stepped inside, I froze. The bed was empty, completely empty, but the sheets were tangled, as if someone had been lying there moments before. I glanced around the room, and my heart skipped a beat. The window, which was always locked and sealed tight, was open, the curtains fluttering in the breeze. Before I could even think, I heard a low, guttural sound behind me, a soft groan. I whipped around, my flashlight shaking in my hand. But there was nothing. The room was still, too still, and then I heard it again, louder this time, like a low murmur coming from the corner of the room. I pointed the flashlight toward the sound, but all I saw were shadows. No figure, no movement. Suddenly, the door slammed shut behind me. I whipped around, my heart hammering in my chest, but the room was locked. I was trapped, The whispers started again. I couldn't understand the words, but they were there, swirling in the air, so close that I could feel them brushing against my skin. And then the faintest sound of footsteps echoed behind me. I turned quickly, but the room was still empty. The whispers grew louder, more frantic. And then, through the corner of my eye, I saw it, a shadow, standing in the far corner of the room, just beyond the edge of the bed. The shadow moved. It wasn't just standing there. It shifted, as if it was reaching out toward me. I screamed and ran toward the door, pounding on it, begging for someone to hear me. My breath was ragged, my body trembling. But when I turned back, the shadow was gone. The room was empty again. The door clicked open, as if it had been unlocked from the outside. I don't know how I got out of that room. My hands were shaking as I left. But as I turned back to look, I swear I saw something standing at the window. A figure, dark and formless, watching me from the shadows. The next morning, I was too shaken to work. I told the doctor about what happened, about the noises, the shadow. He dismissed it as fatigue, said I was imagining things. But I knew what I saw. I knew what I heard. And now, every time I pass room 303, I feel it, the cold, the darkness, the presence watching me. I don't know what's in that room, but I know it's not just Mr. Howard. It's something else. Something that should never have been allowed to wake. After that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong with Mr. Howard's room. The voice he had whispered to me, I tried to tell myself it was just a hallucination, that I had imagined it from the stress. But deep down, I knew better. For the next few nights, I couldn't bring myself to check on him. I stayed away from room 303 as much as I could, even though I knew it was my job. But then one night, I was assigned to the night shift again, and I had to go back. I had no choice. It was late when I approached the door to Mr. Howard's room, the hallway stretching endlessly before me, the soft buzzing of the lights overhead the only sound. I stood outside for a moment, listening for anything unusual. The silence was heavy, like it was holding its breath. I pushed open the door, the hinges creaking in the quiet. I could feel my heart racing in my chest as I entered. The room was dimly lit, the machines humming softly, but everything seemed normal. Too normal. Mr. Howard was still in his bed, his chest rising and falling gently with each breath. He looked the same as always. But then I noticed something strange. The bedside table was moved. It was a small table, just beside the bed, but it had been shifted just slightly, almost as if someone had been sitting there. There was no reason for it to be out of place. I took a step closer to the bed, my eyes drawn to Mr. Howard's face. His eyes were closed, but there was something about him that didn't feel right. He was too still, too perfect. I couldn't look away. And then in the stillness of the room, I heard it again. That whisper. Julie, it was faint but unmistakable. His voice, raspy and cracked, came from his mouth, but his lips didn't move. I froze, unable to move. My pulse raced in my ears, the blood rushing to my head. The room seemed to grow colder, the air thickening around me as if I were suffocating. I leaned in closer, my hand trembling as I reached for the call button. But before I could press it, Mr. Howard's eyes snapped open. They were black, hollow, not the eyes I had seen before. Those eyes were full of life, but these were empty, like the eyes of something that shouldn't be alive. Julie, he whispered again, his voice coming from his chest, his mouth still unmoving. You shouldn't be here. I backed away slowly, my legs shaky, and then the room went cold. so cold I could see my breath. The air felt heavy, and I couldn't breathe, couldn't speak. It was as if the walls were closing in around me. I turned to leave, but the door wouldn't open. I yanked at the handle, panic rising in my chest. My heart pounded in my ears as I pulled harder. The room was getting darker, and then, from the corner of my eye, I saw him move. Mr. Howard's body jerked, his head tilting toward me at an unnatural angle. His arms reached out, long and stiff, stretching toward me like the limbs of something not human. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Just a low, guttural sound like a growl, mixed with the whispers of dozens of voices calling my name. I screamed. I don't remember how I managed to get out, but I ran out of the room, slamming the door behind me. I leaned against the wall, gasping for breath. My mind was reeling, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. But deep down I knew Mr. Howard wasn't just a patient. He wasn't just in a coma. He was something else, something that had never truly left. The next morning, the doctors came to check on him, just like every other day. But when they opened the door to his room, he was gone. There was no sign of him, no evidence he had ever been there. The bed was empty, the sheets pristine, and all the machines turned off. No trace of Mr. Howard. I thought I was losing my mind. But then that evening, as I was leaving the hospital, I passed by the ICU. I swear I saw his face, just for a second, his hollow eyes staring at me through the glass. And as I walked out into the parking lot, I heard his voice once more, Julie, faint like a whisper in the wind. And I know now, no matter how far I run, he will always be there, waiting, watching, waiting for the moment when I can't escape his gaze. The days after that night passed slowly, but the unease never left. I tried to go back to my normal routine, but something had changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. My mind kept replaying the image of Mr. Howard sitting up in that bed, his empty eyes staring at the wall, his mouth whispering those chilling words. I told myself it was just stress, just my imagination running wild after a long shift. But deep down, I knew it was something more. A few nights later, it happened again. I was working another late shift in the ICU. The hospital was quieter than usual, and the sound of my footsteps echoed down the sterile white halls. I had just finished checking on a few patients when I was called to room 303. The nurses' station had received an alert that Mr. Howard's vitals were fluctuating, but when I checked the monitor, everything looked normal. I wasn't supposed to enter the room without a doctor's order, but something in my gut told me I had to go. I walked into the room, and for a moment, everything seemed calm. The lights were on, and the sound of the ventilator and heart monitor filled the space. Mr. Howard was lying in his bed, as still as he had been before. His face was pale, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. I sighed in relief, thinking I might have been imagining things. But then I noticed something. The blankets on his bed, his hands, were different. They weren't in the same position as I had left them. The sheets were pulled tighter, and his hands, which had been resting by his sides, were now placed over his chest in a perfect, unnatural pose. I took a step closer, my heart racing, but I hesitated. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me. His eyes were closed, but something about the way his body was positioned, it was wrong. The shadows in the room seemed darker, more pronounced, and the air felt heavier, colder. And then I heard it, a soft, almost inaudible whisper, just like before. Julie. I froze. My breath caught in my throat. I turned to look at Mr. Howard, but his eyes were still closed. I stepped back, my hand gripping the doorframe, and that's when it happened. His mouth opened, Not wide, but just enough for a sound to escape. It was a whisper again. "Help me." I couldn't breathe. My legs felt weak, but I couldn't leave. I had to check on him. I reached for the call button, but before I could press it, his eyes opened. Wide. Too wide. They were black, empty, like pits that swallowed all light. For a moment, everything went still. His voice, clearer this time, filled the room. "You shouldn't have come back, Julie." I backed away, my hand trembling as I tried to steady myself. My vision blurred, and the room around me seemed to warp. I could feel the walls closing in, the air thickening, as though something was pressing against me. The temperature dropped suddenly, and I could see my breath in front of me. "Julie, come closer," Mr. Howard's voice whispered again, but this time it wasn't just from him. It came from all around me. It echoed from the walls, from the shadows, and then from inside my own mind. "You can't run." I turned and ran out of the room, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't look back. The last thing I heard before the door slammed behind me was the sound of his voice, a raspy, desperate sound that seemed to follow me down the hall. The nurses at the station were as shocked as I was. When we checked the cameras, they showed nothing unusual. Mr. Howard's vitals were normal, and he was still resting peacefully in his bed. There was no sign of him having moved at all. But I know what I saw. I know what I heard. Mr. Howard isn't just a patient. He's something else. Something that doesn't belong in this world. And I've learned that the hard way. I never went back to room 303 again, and the whispers still haunt me to this day. Sometimes, when I walk the halls at night, I hear them again. The whispers, faint at first, but growing louder, calling my name. And I know somewhere Mr. Howard is waiting for me to return and help him. After the incident in room 303, I thought I could just brush it off. I told myself it was just the stress of the night shift, that maybe I had imagined the whole thing. But deep down, I knew what I had seen wasn't a figment of my imagination. The voice, the shadows, they were real and I couldn't escape them. The days that followed were strange. The hospital felt different, as though something had changed. Something had shifted. It wasn't the same place anymore. The halls felt colder, the lights flickered more often, and there was an odd heaviness in the air. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. One night, a few days after the incident, I was on duty again. The hospital was quiet, as it usually was during the graveyard shift. I was walking down the corridor near the ICU when I heard it. A faint whisper, like someone calling my name. I stopped dead in my tracks, my heart racing. I turned around, but there was no one there. The hall was empty. My breath caught in my throat. "Julie," the whisper came again, and this time I was sure it wasn't just my mind playing tricks. It was clear, unmistakable, and it was coming from somewhere in the hallway. I stepped cautiously toward the source of the sound, my eyes scanning the empty hallway. And then I saw it. The door to room 303 was slightly ajar. I froze. I hadn't been back to that room since that night. No one else had been in there, or so I thought. But now, the door was open, and the dim light from inside cast long shadows across the floor. The air felt thick with tension, as if something was waiting for me inside. I approached the door slowly, my hand shaking as I reached for the handle. The whispers grew louder, more insistent, like they were coming from inside the room itself. I stepped into the room, my heart hammering in my chest. The room was empty, just as I had expected. There was no patient in the bed, no sign of anyone having been there recently. But as I stepped further inside, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. On the floor, next to the bed, was a piece of paper. I bent down to pick it up, and when I unfolded it, my blood ran cold. The note simply said, "Help me," but the handwriting, it wasn't the same as before. It was different, jagged, distorted, like something or someone was writing with an unnatural hand. I dropped the note in horror, my fingers numb with fear. Then out of the corner of my eye, I saw it again. The man, Mr. Howard. His figure was standing at the foot of the bed, his eyes locked onto mine. His skin was even more decayed than before, his mouth stretching wide into a grin that was far too large for a human face. He didn't move, just stood there, staring at me, his eyes hollow and black, as if there was nothing but darkness inside him. Before I could react, the lights in the room flickered violently, and the air turned frigid. I felt a cold hand on my shoulder, and when I spun around, no one was there, but I could hear him. His voice, deep and raspy, was right next to my ear. "You can't leave. You opened the door. Now you belong to me." I felt a cold wave wash over me, suffocating me, pulling me into the darkness. The room began to spin, and I stumbled backward, crashing into the wall. My vision blurred, and the last thing I saw before I passed out was Mr. Howard's grinning face, getting closer and closer, his mouth opening wide to swallow me whole. When I woke up, I was back in the nurse's station, my uniform soaked in sweat. I tried to tell myself it was just a dream, that I had passed out from exhaustion, but I couldn't shake the feeling that Mr. Howard was still out there, waiting for me to come back. And this time, there would be no escaping him. I don't know how long I'll last at this hospital, but I know one thing. Something is wrong here, and it's not just the spirits of the dead. It's something darker, something that wants to pull me into the grave with them. I thought I was losing my mind after that night, but things only got worse. After Mr. Howard's incident, I thought maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe it was the exhaustion or the stress of working the night shift. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. They followed me, lurking at the edges of my consciousness, creeping into my thoughts at the most inopportune moments. A few nights later, I was assigned to a different wing of the hospital, one that was even older and more abandoned than the rest of the building. It was an old wing, the kind of place where the paint was peeling off the walls, and the air smelled of mildew and death. I had been there before, but it always made me uneasy. Something about it felt wrong, like the memories of those who passed away there still lingered in the walls. As I made my rounds, checking the rooms of the patients, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Every so often, I'd hear a whisper, soft at first, but then louder and louder, until it felt like someone was right behind me. "Julie," the voice would say, just like Mr. Howard's. I turned every corner, expecting to see someone, but the halls were empty. No one was there. The voice sounded like it was coming from the walls themselves, or maybe the very air around me. It felt suffocating. I kept walking, trying to ignore it, telling myself it was all in my head. But when I entered room 214, I saw something that made my blood freeze. The room was empty, just like it had been the night before. But there at the foot of the bed was a note. It was small, written in a shaky hand, and when I picked it up, my hands trembled. It read, "You shouldn't have left." The handwriting was faint, almost illegible, but the words were clear. I turned, half expecting to see someone standing in the corner of the room, watching me. But there was no one, only the flickering light overhead, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. The hair on the back of my neck stood up as I backed out of the room. the note still clenched in my hand. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay in that room any longer. Something had been there, something that shouldn't have been. As I walked down the hall, I heard it again, the whisper. It was so close, so real, like it was right beside me. Julie, the voice was faint but unmistakable. I stopped, my heart pounding in my chest, my breath catching in my throat. I turned to look behind me, but no one was there. I was alone in the hallway. The next morning, I tried to tell my supervisor about the note, about the whispering, but she just brushed it off. "You're overworked, Julie," she said. "It's the stress. Just get some rest." But I couldn't shake it. I knew what I had heard, what I had felt. The hospital was haunted. There was no other explanation. The voices, the whispers, they were real. I never went back to that wing again. But even now, when I close my eyes, I hear that voice calling to me from the shadows, from the walls, from the very place where the dead lie waiting. I know what I heard, and I know I wasn't alone that night. And now, I can't help but wonder, if the dead are truly gone, why do they still speak? After that night, I thought I had seen the last of Mr. Howard. I left the hospital for a few weeks, trying to shake the feeling of dread that clung to me, but the memories of that night followed me. The whispers, the shadows, the feeling that I had encountered something not meant for this world. They all stayed with me, lurking in the back of my mind. But one night, a few months later, I returned to the hospital to pick up my belongings. It had been a while since I had worked the night shift, but I figured it would be fine to gather my things and leave quietly. I walked down the familiar hallways, my footsteps echoing in the stillness. The building was quieter than usual, the kind of silence that makes your skin prickle, as if the walls themselves are watching you. I reached the nurse's station, and when I went to collect my things, I saw something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A new chart on the counter. A patient who had just been admitted to room 303. I froze. There was no reason for me to feel that cold feeling again, but the moment I saw the name, I knew something was wrong. Mr. Howard's name, written clearly on the chart. I rushed to the ICU to check, my heart hammering in my chest. When I reached the door to room 303, I hesitated. The memory of that night flooded back, the eerie whisper, the dark shadows. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to know what had happened. I pushed the door open, and what I saw made my breath catch in my throat. The bed was empty. The room was dark, colder than the rest of the ICU, and the monitors were off. But there was something else, something I couldn't explain. In the corner of the room, I saw a figure, a man wearing a hospital gown, sitting in the dark, his face turned away from me. I could feel the air grow heavier as I approached. My mind screamed at me to turn around, to leave, but I stepped closer. As I reached the bed, the man turned and I froze. It was Mr. Howard, but it wasn't him. His eyes were wide, empty black sockets, his skin a sickly gray. His mouth curled into that same twisted grin, and the whisper came again, soft but clear. "You came back." I turned to run, but the door slammed shut, trapping me inside. The lights flickered and went out completely. The whisper swirled around me, growing louder all around me, closing in. Julie, it was no longer Mr. Howard's voice. It was 1,000 voices, speaking at once, pulling me toward the bed. I don't know how I managed to get out. I don't know if I ran or if I just woke up, but when I found myself in the hallway again, the door to room 303 was open. The bed was empty. The next morning, I was told that no one had been admitted to room 303. No new patient, no chart. There was no record of Mr. Howard or anyone being in that room. I've never been back to that hospital. I left and I never looked back. But sometimes when I close my eyes, I hear the whispers. They're still there in the back of my mind, waiting for me to remember, waiting for me to come back. Before we continue, just a thought. Have you ever noticed how some rooms feel different at night than they do during the day? Like the walls are listening, or the shadows are waiting for something. Maybe it's your mind playing tricks. Or maybe this next story will explain why. Most people don't think about the work that goes on in a cemetery after the sun sets. The tombstone stands silent. The wind rustles through the trees, and the only sound is the occasional crack of a branch breaking in the distance. But for those who work the graveyard shift, like Max, the cemetery's lone caretaker, there's much more to the night than what meets the eye. Some nights, the dead don't stay quiet. And sometimes, the shadows hold secrets that should never be uncovered. This is Max's story, one that will make you question what really happens when the world sleeps. Story: the burial that shouldn't have happened. I've worked as the night caretaker at the old cemetery on the edge of town for as long as I can remember. It's a quiet job, mostly. During the day, families come and go, paying their respects, and I take care of the grounds. But at night, it's different. The cemetery is a place of stillness, and that's when things get strange. It started on a regular night, just like any other. The moon was full, and the wind carried a chill through the graveyard. The usual routine: checking the grounds, making sure everything was in order. The tombstone stood tall and unmoving in the darkness, casting long shadows across the dirt paths. But as I walked past one of the oldest graves, I felt it, a chill that ran down my spine. It wasn't the cold night air. It was something else, something wrong. I stopped, looking around. The night felt heavier, almost like the air was thicker than usual. That's when I noticed the fresh dirt by the old crypt right next to the cemetery's farthest corner. I had seen it before, a new grave, freshly dug. But this one, something about it was off. The soil looked disturbed, and the grave wasn't marked with a headstone. I knew the procedure, and I couldn't think of anyone who had been scheduled for burial that night. There were no arrangements, no family visiting. I walked closer to inspect it. The ground seemed to ripple beneath my boots, as if something was stirring beneath the earth. Then I heard it, a faint whisper, like a voice calling from underground. At first, I thought it was just a wind, but then it came again, clearer this time, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. It was as if someone was asking for help from deep within the earth. I stepped back, my pulse quickening. I had never heard anything like that before, and the strange feeling in my gut told me to leave. But I couldn't. Something made me look down at the grave one last time, and that's when I saw it. The coffin was exposed. It wasn't buried. It wasn't 6 feet under. It was lying there, half submerged in the dirt, the lid slightly cracked open, and the faintest glow of light coming from within. I could barely breathe as I stepped closer, my hands trembling. I reached for the lid and pulled it open. I wish I hadn't. Inside was a man. His eyes were wide open, his body pale and stiff. But it wasn't just that. His hand, his left hand, was moving, very slowly, but moving nonetheless, reaching out toward me, as though he were trying to grab me, to pull me in. I stumbled backward, almost falling into the grave myself. His mouth opened, but no sound came out, just a slow, rattling breath. I ran. I ran like I'd never run before, not stopping until I reached the gate of the cemetery. The air around me felt thick, like I was being watched, but when I turned around, The cemetery was silent again. The grave was untouched, the soil smooth, as if nothing had ever happened. I never spoke about that night to anyone. I couldn't, and I never went back to that part of the cemetery. But every night since, I felt that same chill creeping up my spine whenever I passed by the old crypt. And sometimes when I'm walking the ground alone, I swear I hear the faint whisper of that voice again, calling from beneath the earth, asking for help. It wasn't long after that first encounter that I started noticing things. Little things at first. The way the night felt colder, the way the trees seemed to sway more, even when there was no wind. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, and they felt like they were following me, watching me. But it wasn't just in my head. A few weeks later, I was sitting in the caretaker's office, doing my usual check of the cemetery records, when I noticed something odd in the old ledger. The burial I had witnessed, the one where the man's body was still in the grave, wasn't in the book. There was no record of it. No name, no date, nothing. I thought I had made a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten to note it down, but as I scanned the pages, I saw something even stranger. There was a date, only a few days ago, written in the margin next to the section for the cemetery's old crypt, March 18th, 1957. But the crypt wasn't supposed to be used for any burials. It was just a forgotten part of the cemetery, a place for the long dead. So why was it listed, and who had buried someone there? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided I had to go back to that grave, the one with the disturbed soil, to see if there was any sign of what had happened. It was after midnight when I finally found the courage to return. The moon was high in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the grounds. I took my shovel and headed toward the old crypt. When I arrived, the air was thick with that familiar unease. The grave was exactly as I had left it, half open, the coffin exposed. But this time, something was different. The soil around the grave had been disturbed even more. As I stood there, staring at the ground, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was no one there. The chill on my skin remained, though, like someone was standing right behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I looked down at the open grave. The man was gone. I stared into the hole, my breath catching. The coffin had been moved, dragged out, but there was no sign of the body. I was frozen, not knowing whether to look around or run. But before I could move, I heard it, the whisper again, low, rasping, like it was right next to me. "Max, you let me out." The voice was unmistakable. It was the man from the grave. My pulse surged, and I stumbled back, almost falling into the hole. The air grew colder, and the whispering grew louder, swirling around me. I turned to run, but when I looked up, the figure was standing at the edge of the grave. The same man. His eyes were wide, his skin gray and lifeless, but his mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. His fingers twitched, his hand outstretched toward me. "You're the one who buried me," he said in a voice that made my blood run cold. "Now you will join me." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, my legs frozen as he stepped closer. The whispering surrounded me, growing louder and louder, until it felt like the whole cemetery was alive with voices, all calling my name. I stumbled backward, tripping over the ground, and when I looked up, the man was gone, just vanished. I ran back to the caretaker's office, locking myself in, but I could still feel his presence, his voice like a shadow, following me. The whispering hasn't stopped since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. It haunts my dreams. And every time I walk past that grave, I swear I feel someone watching me. I don't know if the man in the grave was real or if something far darker had taken his place. All I know is that I can never forget his words. You let me out. It wasn't long after that first encounter that I started noticing things. Little things at first. The way the night felt colder. The way the trees seemed to sway more, even when there was no wind. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, darker, and they felt like they were following me, watching me. But it wasn't just in my head. A few weeks later, I was sitting in the caretaker's office, doing my usual check of the cemetery records, when I noticed something odd in the old ledger. The burial I had witnessed, the one where the man's body was still in the grave, wasn't in the book. There was no record of it. No name, no date, nothing. I thought I had made a mistake. Maybe I had forgotten to note it down, but as I scanned the pages, I saw something even stranger. There was a date, only a few days ago, written in the margin next to the section for the cemetery's old crypt. March 18th, 1957. But the crypt wasn't supposed to be used for any burials. It was just a forgotten part of the cemetery, a place for the long dead. So why was it listed, and who had buried someone there? That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I decided I had to go back to that grave, the one with the disturbed soil, to see if there was any sign of what had happened. It was after midnight when I finally found the courage to return. The moon was high in the sky, casting eerie shadows across the grounds. I took my shovel and headed toward the old crypt. When I arrived, the air was thick with that familiar unease. The grave was exactly as I had left it, half open, the coffin exposed. But this time, something was different. The soil around the grave had been disturbed even more. As I stood there, staring at the ground, I felt a cold hand on my shoulder. I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. But there was no one there. The chill on my skin remained, though, like someone was standing right behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I looked down at the open grave. The man was gone. I stared into the hole, my breath catching. The coffin had been moved, dragged out, but there was no sign of the body. I was frozen, not knowing whether to look around or run. But before I could move, I heard it, the whisper again, low, rasping, like it was right next to me. "Max, you let me out." The voice was unmistakable. It was the man from the grave. My pulse surged, and I stumbled back, almost falling into the hole. The air grew colder, and the whispering grew louder, swirling around me. I turned to run, but when I looked up, the figure was standing at the edge of the grave. The same man. His eyes were wide, his skin gray and lifeless, but his mouth stretched into a grotesque smile. His fingers twitched, his hand outstretched toward me. "You're the one who buried me," he said in a voice that made my blood run cold. "Now you will join me." I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stood there, my legs frozen as he stepped closer. The whispering surrounded me, growing louder and louder, until it felt like the whole cemetery was alive with voices, all calling my name. I stumbled backward, tripping over the ground, and when I looked up, the man was gone, just vanished. I ran back to the caretaker's office, locking myself in, but I could still feel his presence, his voice like a shadow, following me. The whispering hasn't stopped since. Every time I close my eyes, I hear it. It haunts my dreams. And every time I walk past that grave, I swear I feel someone watching me. I don't know if the man in the grave was real, or if something far darker had taken his place. All I know is that I can never forget his words. "You let me out." I didn't know what to do after that night. I thought I was losing my mind. Maybe it was the isolation. Maybe the cemetery was just playing tricks on me. But the whispers didn't stop. Every night since, I heard them. Soft at first, like a breeze brushing against my ear, then louder, more persistent. They would follow me as I walked the grounds, surrounding me like a thick fog. But the worst part? The whispers were no longer just in my head. They were real. One night, just a few days after the encounter at the grave, I came back to the cemetery to finish my rounds. The air was heavy, thick with the feeling that something was wrong. The wind howled through the trees, and the usual peace of the cemetery was gone, replaced with an unnerving tension. As I passed by the old crypt again, I felt the coldness sweep over me like a wave. I turned to look, half expecting to see the grave empty again. But there was something different this time. The grave was full. The soil had been replaced, the dirt smoothed over like nothing had happened. My heart raced as I approached. I didn't know what I was expecting, but the sight of that grave, restored, perfect, felt wrong. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the whispers growing louder, more insistent, until I couldn't take it anymore. I reached down, brushing my fingers against the fresh soil, and that's when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of nails scraping against wood, coming from inside the grave. I froze. My whole body went cold as I realized what was happening. I stepped back, but the sound continued, louder now. Scratching, clawing. The unmistakable sound of something trying to break free. I ran to the caretaker's office, locking the door behind me. My breath was shallow, my hands shaking as I grabbed the phone, desperate to call someone, anyone. But when I looked out the small window, I saw him, the man. He was standing by the grave again, his eyes locked on mine from across the cemetery. His face was even more distorted now, his skin hanging off his bones, his eyes hollow and dark. The moment he saw me, he smiled, a grin that stretched impossibly wide across his face. "Max!" His voice echoed in my head, clear as day. "You can't hide from me. You open the door." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew I couldn't stay there any longer. I ran out of the office, past the graveyard, and into the town. I never returned to the cemetery after that night. I couldn't, but the whispers followed me. They always have. And sometimes when I close my eyes, I can still hear them. I can hear the sound of the man's voice just behind me, whispering my name. And I know he's still out there, waiting for me to return to the grave he buried me in. I don't know if I'll ever escape it. It's been months since I left the cemetery, but no matter where I go, I can't escape it. The memories, the whispers, they follow me. Sometimes I think I'm going crazy. The man I saw in that grave, his face twisted in that sickening grin, has haunted me ever since. But it wasn't just his appearance. It was a feeling, that deep, suffocating sensation that something was watching me, waiting for me to return. I thought leaving would be enough, but it wasn't. The whispers grew louder. At night, I could hear them calling to me, faint at first, like a murmur in the distance, but always growing stronger. "Max," the voice would say, echoing through my thoughts. And when I tried to sleep, I saw him, the man, standing in the shadows, watching me, his eyes hollow and empty, filled with malice. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to go back to the cemetery, to confront whatever was haunting me. I didn't know what I was expecting, but I had to face it. I had to know if it was real, or if it was just some twisted nightmare. The cemetery was just as I remembered it, but it was different now. The air was thick, the silence oppressive. I made my way to the old crypt, the place where it all began. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood in front of the grave, the earth still freshly disturbed. And that's when I saw it. The coffin was open. I don't know how it happened. I don't know if it was a wind or something far darker had opened it, but the lid was wide open, the soil around it disturbed as though something had clawed its way out. I stepped closer, my legs trembling, the whispers in my ears growing louder and louder. Max. They were calling my name again, but this time they were not just in my head. I could hear them surrounding me, swirling in the air, filling the cemetery with their maddening echoes. I looked down into the open coffin, and my breath caught in my throat. The man, he was there, but he wasn't the same. His body was decayed, his skin hanging off his bones, his eyes wide open and staring directly at me. He had no pupils, just hollow voids that seemed to suck the life out of everything around him. His mouth opened, and the words came out in a low, raspy whisper. "You let me out." I felt my knees buckle as I stumbled backward. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, the shadows growing longer, closer. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move. My body felt frozen in place, and I realized too late that I wasn't alone. The man wasn't the only thing in the grave anymore. From the corners of my eyes, I saw them, shapes, figures rising from the ground. They were not human. Their bodies were twisted, contorted in unnatural ways, their eyes just like his, empty, hollow. They reached for me with skeletal hands, their mouths open wide, ready to drag me down with them into the grave. The whispering became deafening. I could hear their voices, their whispers, calling me to join them in the earth. They were pulling me in, dragging me closer to the grave. But just as I felt their cold hands on my shoulders, I screamed. I woke up on the floor of the caretaker's office, gasping for air. My heart was racing, my hands shaking. But when I looked around, the cemetery was empty. The grave, the man, the figures, everything was gone. But the whispers, they didn't stop. They followed me, every step I took, every moment of silence. And I know now, deep down, that I didn't escape. I can still hear them, waiting for me to return. And I know that someday I'll be drawn back to that grave, pulled into the earth by the man I buried. It's only a matter of time before I'm called again. It's been days since I came back from the cemetery, but the nightmares haven't stopped. They never stopped. The whispers that fill my mind are louder now, like a constant hum in the back of my skull. I can hear them during the day, at work, at home, always following me. Sometimes I can't tell they're real, or if I'm just losing my grip on reality. But I know one thing for sure. Something is waiting for me, something I can't outrun. The other night, I tried to sleep. I thought, maybe if I rested, if I closed my eyes, it would all go away. But when I woke up, I was lying in a place I didn't recognize. The ground beneath me was cold, the air thick with damp smell, like the earth had just been disturbed. I tried to sit up, but I couldn't. My body felt numb, stiff, as if I had been buried alive. Panic surged through me, and I looked around. The walls were high, and I could hear the sound of water dripping somewhere in the distance. The air was cold, and the ground was wet like a crypt or a tomb. I felt the familiar weight on my chest, the feeling of being watched. I turned my head, and there he was, the man. His skin was decayed, his eyes black holes, his mouth gaping open in a grin that shouldn't be possible for a human. He was standing just a few feet away, his body unnaturally still, yet it felt like he was breathing, waiting, and then he spoke, his voice like nails dragging across stone. "You opened the door, Max." I felt a cold sweat break out on my skin as I realized what he meant. I had unlocked something. I had opened a grave that should never have been opened. And now, the man, the one who had never truly been buried, was standing in front of me. But it wasn't just him. Behind him, more figures emerged from the shadows. Figures like him, twisted and decayed, their limbs bent at unnatural angles, their faces hollow and grotesque. I tried to move, to run, but my legs wouldn't obey me. I couldn't breathe. The whispers grew louder, echoing around me, their voices melding together into one constant, suffocating sound. "Max, join us." I could feel their cold hands reaching for me, their bony fingers brushing my skin, dragging me back into the depths. The man stepped closer, and his voice was barely a whisper in my ear. "You will never leave. You are part of us now." I tried to scream, but nothing came out. I felt my body being pulled down, the cold earth rising around me, closing in, and then, in that final moment of terror, I saw it, the grave. It was no longer just a grave. It was a doorway to something darker than I had ever imagined. Before I could fall into the abyss, I woke up again. This time, I was in my own bed, drenched in sweat, my heart pounding in my chest. The room was silent, but the feeling that I wasn't alone, it never left. I don't know if I was truly there in that grave, or if it was just a dream, but I do know this. Whatever I open that night is real. It's coming for me, and I can't escape it. The whispers are louder now, like a warning, like a promise. They'll come for me when I least expect it, and when they do, there will be no turning back. The grave won't just call me in my sleep. It's waiting for me, standing at the door, watching me from the shadows. And when I return, it won't be me anymore. It will be them, pulling me down with them into the earth, into the darkness where I belong. I thought I could escape. I thought leaving the cemetery, leaving that job behind, would be enough to end the nightmares, to stop the whispers that have haunted me for so long. But I was wrong. I was a fool to think I could outrun it, to think that just because I closed my eyes, it would go away. Every night, I still hear the whispering voices. They call to me from the darkness, from the depths of the earth, from the grave I thought I'd buried. And no matter where I go, I know they're waiting for me to return. I know what they want now. It's not just me they want. It's my soul. I woke up this morning, unable to shake the feeling of dread. The house was quiet, the day bright and peaceful, but I couldn't ignore the pull. I had to go back. I couldn't resist anymore. I made my way to the cemetery in the dead of night. The air colder than it's ever been, the moon full and heavy in the sky. The moment I stepped onto the grounds, I knew it was too late. The whispers started again, louder this time, surrounding me. It was no longer a question of if they were coming for me. I went to the old grave. The soil was fresh again. The coffin was waiting. As I stood there, staring down into the open grave, I felt a familiar chill on the back of my neck. The man, the one I had buried so long ago, was waiting in the shadows, watching me. His eyes, black as night, locked onto mine as he whispered, "You can't escape, Max." I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The ground beneath me seemed to shift, like it was alive, pulling me in. The whispers grew deafening, swirling around me like a storm. I looked back at the grave. The man was there, but he wasn't the only one. The others had risen too, figures from the grave, their faces hollow and empty, their eyes filled with endless darkness. They surrounded me, pulling me down into the earth. Their hands were cold, like ice, their fingers digging into my skin. I could feel the earth closing in, the weight of it suffocating me, dragging me into the darkness. "Welcome home, Max," the man said, his voice cold and hollow. "We've been waiting." And then everything went black. I don't know how long I was gone. Days? Weeks? It doesn't matter anymore. When I woke up, I was no longer in the cemetery. I was in the dark, cold earth, surrounded by the dead. The whispers were silent now, but I knew they were still there, waiting for the next soul to claim. I'm not Max anymore. I'm just another shadow in the graveyard, another lost soul, trapped forever in the dark. And now, as I stand here in the cemetery, waiting for the next lost soul to wander in, I know the whispers will never stop. They will never let me go. Before the next one begins, can I ask you something simple? When you walk into a room, do you ever feel like something was just there and left, like the air is holding its breath? Some people say that's instinct. Others say it's a warning. Let's see which one fits better after this next story. Story 1. The passenger who wasn't there. Late nights on the bus are always the quietest. You can hear every creak of the vehicle, every sway as it turns down dimly lit streets. It's a strange kind of loneliness when you're surrounded by people, but they're not talking. On that night, I was on the last route of the day. The clock was creeping closer to midnight. Just a few passengers scattered around, lost in their own worlds. I pulled at the usual stop, a dim street corner where the light flickered overhead. It wasn't busy, but there was always someone waiting there, no matter the time. That night, it was a man I'd never seen before. Tall, wearing a long coat, and the kind of hat that casts a shadow over his face. He stepped onto the bus quietly, his eyes hidden beneath the brim. It was nothing unusual at first. You see all kinds of people at night, especially when you're driving a late route. The kind of people who avoid eye contact, like they're hiding something. But something about him felt off. It was hard to describe, but a cold sensation washed over me. I couldn't shake it. I kept glancing back through the rear-view mirror, watching him sit down in the seat right in front of the back door. His body was completely still. No shifting, no looking out the window, just silence. The bus was almost completely empty, save for a few regulars dozing off in their seats. I focused back on the road, trying to shake off the unease, but my eyes kept darting back to him. I couldn't help it. It was like he wasn't supposed to be there. As I passed the next few stops, I glanced back again, and that's when I noticed it. He was gone. I didn't see him get off, and the seat where he had been sitting was now completely empty. My heart started to race. I pulled over at the next light and checked the rear-view mirror again. Still no sign of him. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe I'd imagined it. But then the feeling hit me again, the icy, suffocating sense that something wasn't right. I kept driving, hoping that I was just overthinking it. But when I hit the final stop and the bus was completely empty, I felt the weight of it. I walked through the aisles, checking each seat, even the back one where he'd been. Nothing. I can't explain what happened that night, but I know this. There was no way that man got off at any of those stops. There were no other people on the road. And when I drove back past that same street corner where he'd gotten on, it was just as empty as it had been before. I've done this route hundreds of times, but that night still haunts me. Every time I pass that stop now, I swear I feel that cold sensation again. And every time I look for him, but he's never there. Story 2, The Echoes of the Past. It was a stormy night. The kind where the rain hits the windows so hard it feels like the world is closing around you. I was behind the wheel of my bus, doing the usual late-night run, but the weather made everything feel heavier, more oppressive. The streets were nearly empty, save for the occasional car passing by. I remember the sound of the rain and the soft hum of the wipers as they swiped across the windshield in slow, rhythmic intervals. I pulled into a stop near an old, abandoned station, one that had been shut down for years. The building was falling apart, its windows cracked and boarded up, but there was something about it that always made me uneasy. I never stopped there unless I had to, but that night I saw people waiting by the old platform. A group of passengers boarded, mostly quiet, their faces hidden under hoods and scarves. But there was one woman at the back, an older woman who stood out. Her eyes were distant, as if she were staring into something far beyond the bus. She seemed out of place, almost as if she didn't belong in the here and now. She sat quietly, her hands clasped in her lap, her gaze fixed on the window as the storm raged outside. As the bus pulled away from the station, I caught a glimpse of the old building again, the flickering light from the bus casting long shadows against its cracked walls. That's when the woman spoke. "This place, it's never been the same since the fire," she said, her voice soft but clear. I didn't respond at first, thinking she was talking about the state of the station. But then she repeated herself, this time with more intensity. "Since the fire, it's never been the same." I turned to ask her what she meant, but when I did, she was gone. Just gone. No sign of her, no movement in the seat. I thought I'd imagined it, but I quickly checked the rear-view mirror. There was no one there. The seat was completely empty, as if she had never been there at all. I slammed on the brakes, my heart racing. I got up and walked down the aisle, checking every seat. Nothing, just a few regular passengers who hadn't even noticed the woman's absence. When I finally got to my next stop, I did what I should have done earlier. I looked up the history of that old station, and what I found shocked me. There was indeed a fire there years ago, one that had left the building in ruins. The fire had been devastating, and many had died in it. But here's the thing. The woman in the back of my bus, the one who spoke about the fire, she couldn't have known about it. The station had been closed for decades by then. No one had mentioned it to her. I haven't stopped at that station since that night, and every time I drive past it, I can't help but wonder, was she really there? Or was she just an echo from the past? A reminder of something that should never have been forgotten? Story 3, The Silent Rider. The night had a way of making everything feel heavier. The city was quiet, the kind of quiet that only comes when everything seems abandoned. The moonlight spilled over the streets like a blanket, casting long shadows, while the soft hum of the bus engine was the only sound breaking the silence. It was one of those nights where you could feel the weight of time slowing down, as though the world itself was holding its breath. The bus was practically empty, just a few souls heading home after long days, slumped in their seats, their eyes barely open. As usual, I wasn't really paying attention to any of them. I had my routine. I knew who would get off at each stop, when the streets would start getting quieter. But that night, something was different. I noticed her as soon as I pulled up to the stop. She was standing there, under the flickering street lamp, a woman, dressed in a red coat that looked a little out of place in the dark. She was tall, but the coat swallowed her figure, making her look almost skeletal. I couldn't make out her face, as it was hidden behind a mass of dark hair that hung low, covering most of her features. She stepped onto the bus with a quiet grace, moving so slowly it almost felt like she wasn't really walking, just gliding. I didn't think much of it at first. people get on late all the time. But there was something about her that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Maybe it was the way she didn't say anything when she walked past. No nod, no thank you. Nothing. Just silence. She chose a seat near the back, the very last row, and sat down with her hands resting on her lap. I kept an eye on her through the rear-view mirror as I drove. At first, everything seemed normal, but as I drove further down the road, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. She hadn't moved. Not once. She didn't shift in her seat, didn't look out the window, didn't even adjust her hair. She just sat there, completely still, her face hidden, her presence almost unnatural. I tried to focus on the road, but I couldn't stop glancing back. There was something in the stillness that bothered me, something that didn't sit right. Everyone else on the bus was just going about their business, half asleep, barely paying attention, but my eyes kept darting back to her. That same unbroken silence. It was like time itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I pulled up to the next stop. The street's empty, not a soul in sight. I glanced at her again through the mirror. Still nothing, just that stillness, like she wasn't even breathing. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter as I opened the doors, my heart starting to race. I was already dreading the moment when I looked back and find her gone. And then when I turned to check the seat, it hit me. She wasn't there. The seat was empty, the red coat gone, as if she had never been there in the first place. I froze. My pulse raced as I quickly checked the aisle. There was no sign of her, no movement, no trace of anyone leaving. I stood up from my seat, panic creeping up my throat, and walked down the aisle, looking behind the seats, checking the back of the bus. Nothing. She had simply vanished. I thought maybe she had slipped off at one of the earlier stops without me noticing. But as I retraced my route, every stop, every corner, I found nothing. No sign of her. I even checked the bus cameras when I got back. But when I rewound the footage, I couldn't find her on any of it. The seat where she had been sitting was empty the whole time. But it wasn't just that. It was a feeling, that feeling of being watched. Even though I was completely alone in the bus. That feeling that someone was standing just behind me, breathing down my neck. The silence, the stillness. Everything about that moment felt wrong. And it didn't end there. Every time I drive that route now, I feel it. That same unease, that same coldness. I can't shake it. I look into the rear-view mirror, hoping not to see her again. But sometimes when the bus is quiet and the night is still, I swear I can feel her presence again. And sometimes, I think I hear the faintest whisper from the back of the bus. But when I look, there's nothing. Story 4, The Vanishing Station. It was just another night on the route, or at least it should have been. The bus was quiet, the road long and winding, with only the occasional streetlight flickering in the distance. I was used to the solitude, the endless stretch of dark roads that seemed to go on forever. But that night, something happened that I couldn't explain. It was around 2 a.m., and I was nearing one of my usual stops. This place was always empty, a forgotten corner of the city that barely saw any traffic. The bus had made this stop dozens of times, and I knew exactly who would be waiting. No one. It was a strange little place, the kind of stop where you wouldn't expect anyone to be. But there she was. I saw her standing by the curb as I approached, a woman dressed in a long coat, with her hair pulled back into a neat bun. She was standing perfectly still, almost too still, as if waiting for something. Her face was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. There was something about her smile, something in her eyes that seemed oddly comforting yet unsettling at the same time. As the bus slowed down, I opened the doors. The woman stepped aboard with a soft thank you, her eyes meeting mine as she passed. "Thank you for picking me up," she said in a quiet, almost serene voice. I nodded, not thinking much of it. It was late, and my brain was running on autopilot. But as she walked down the aisle to sit down, that's when it hit me, her smile. It was the same smile I remember from years ago, from the first route I ever drove. She had been one of the regular passengers back then, someone I had seen nearly every night for months. I couldn't believe it. She had vanished without a trace years ago. She had stopped riding the bus. No explanation, no farewell. I glanced at her again as she settled into a seat near the back. Her eyes were closed, and for a brief moment, I thought I saw something flicker behind them, like memories I didn't want to remember. But when I looked again, she was staring straight ahead, completely still. I couldn't tear my eyes off her. I continued driving, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I couldn't get her out of my mind. The bus stopped at the next few stations, but she never moved. She didn't even look at the windows as we passed familiar streets. I looked back once more, and that's when it happened. She was gone, just like that. I couldn't believe it. I pulled over the side of the road and got out of the bus, walking up and down the aisle, checking every seat. She wasn't there. The seat where she had been sitting was completely empty. I went to the back of the bus, checked the doors, even the luggage compartment. Nothing. No sign of her at all. I thought I was losing my mind. How could she have vanished? There was no way she had gotten off at the previous stop. I had been watching the road the entire time. And when I checked the CCTV footage later, she wasn't on it. She had simply disappeared. But the strangest part? The next night, I pulled into that same stop, and there she was again, standing at the curb just like the night before. I opened the doors, and she stepped onto the bus, smiling at me. But this time, I didn't say anything. I just stared at her, unable to say a word. She walked down the aisle, sat in the same seat, and closed her eyes. And the whole time, I felt like I was stuck in some kind of loop, one that I couldn't escape from. I never told anyone about it. Who would believe me? But I haven't been able to stop thinking about her. Every time I pass that station, I look for her. I can't help it, but she's never there anymore. At least, I don't think she is. Before we dive into the next story, just one question. Have you ever paused a video like this and felt like something didn't want you to finish it? Do you feel like someone or something is paying attention to you right now? Don't worry. That feeling tends to get stronger with the next story. It was supposed to be a quick stop, a last-minute trip to pick up a few things for the road, and then I'd be on my way again. But when I pulled into that Walmart, nestled at the edge of nowhere, I had no idea that this would be the last stop I'd make. I had been driving for hours, my car the only one on the road, surrounded by endless fields of dry grass and the occasional old farmhouse. I wasn't even sure how I'd ended up so far off the beaten path, but the GPS said it was the quickest route to my destination. The sun was starting to set, and I figured I'd grab a drink and some snacks before continuing. But as soon as I parked and stepped out of the car, something felt off. The Walmart looked normal at first, big, bright, and lit up like any other store. But there was an emptiness to it. The parking lot was almost empty, just a few cars scattered around. No people walking in or out, no chatter or noise coming from the entrance. It was almost like the place was abandoned, but the lights were on. The doors were open, and the automatic sliding doors greeted me with that familiar whoosh. I shrugged it off. Maybe it was late. Maybe this town just didn't get many visitors. But the moment I stepped inside, the unease crept in. The air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. The store was quiet. Too quiet, except for the soft hum of fluorescent lights above. The shelves were stocked, the aisles lined with products, but there was something strange about the way the aisles stretched on. They seemed longer than they should have been, the walls farther apart than normal. I thought I was just tired. Maybe the isolation was messing with my head. I grabbed a drink from the cooler and began to walk down the aisles, but the farther I went, the more I felt like I wasn't alone. I passed an elderly woman's stocking shelves in the cleaning supplies aisle. She didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. I tried to give a polite smile, but she didn't even flinch. Her eyes were hollow and focused, as though she wasn't really there. "Excuse me," I said, my voice feeling too loud in the empty store. But she didn't respond. I walked away quickly, a sense of unease creeping into my chest. It was just a Walmart, right? I was being paranoid. But then I realized there were no employees anywhere else. No cashiers. No staff walking around. Even though the store was clearly open, it was as if the whole place was empty. I couldn't find anyone else. That's when I noticed the clock on the wall. The time on the clock was wrong. It wasn't just a little off. It was several hours ahead of the actual time. I pulled out my phone, trying to check the time, but there was no signal. No bars. I checked again, swiping through my apps, but nothing loaded. It felt like something was off. I was starting to sweat. The air too thick and stale for a store that should have been well ventilated. The hum of the lights above felt louder now, echoing in my ears. And still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I walked a little faster, trying to shake the feeling that something was wrong. My shoes made soft tapping sounds against the linoleum floor as I moved deeper into the store, but the place seemed to stretch endlessly. Every aisle I turned into felt longer than the last, the store sprawling out in a way that didn't make sense. The fluorescent lights above flickered occasionally, casting strange shadows on the walls. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt a strange pressure in my chest, like the air around me was growing thicker. I grabbed a random bag of chips from an aisle to calm myself, but as I turned the corner, I froze. A figure was standing at the end of the aisle. A man, tall, wearing a baseball cap and a faded denim jacket. He was facing away from me, staring at the wall, unmoving. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I hesitated. Was he an employee? A customer? I couldn't tell. I cleared my throat, hoping to get his attention. "Excuse me," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. But the man didn't turn. His posture didn't change. I stepped closer, still unsure what to do. I was about to call out again when I noticed something strange. He was standing too still for a normal person. His arms hung stiffly at his sides, his feet planted firmly on the ground as if he was frozen in place. I hesitated. Something wasn't right about this. I took a step back, and that's when I saw it. The shelves behind the man. There was a gap between them, a dark space that didn't look like part of the store's design. I glanced around nervously, then looked back at the man. His face was still turned away, his body frozen, as though he hadn't even noticed my presence. But the gap between the shelves, it moved. It was subtle at first, but it shifted, as if the wall of shelves was somehow alive. My stomach dropped as I realized the space was growing larger. The edges of the shelves were bending, curving inward, slowly pulling apart. I turned around and ran. My heart was pounding in my chest. The aisles blurred as I sprinted past. But as I glanced over my shoulder, the man was still standing there. He hadn't moved, but the dark space between the shelves continued to grow, stretching further than it should. I didn't know what I was running from. I just knew that I needed to get out. I reached the front of the store, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The automatic doors should have opened, but when I pushed the handle, nothing happened. The door didn't budge. I pulled harder, then slammed my body against it, but it was like hitting a solid wall. My mind raced. The doors were supposed to be open. I could see the parking lot through glass, the cars parked out front, the darkness of the night. I wasn't locked in, but I couldn't get out. I turned around and looked back into the store. The lights were dimmer now, flickering more frequently. I could hear something, footsteps, slow and deliberate, echoing through the aisles. My pulse quickened. Was I being followed? I tried the emergency exit at the back of the store. Again, the door was locked. Panic began to rise in my throat. The place felt like it was closing in on me. The hum of the lights above sounded louder now, almost oppressive, as though it was vibrating in my chest. I could still hear the footsteps behind me, but when I turned to look, no one was there. Then came the voice. It was faint at first, so low that I almost thought I imagined it. A whisper, soft and indistinct. But then it grew clearer. You shouldn't be here. The voice wasn't coming from any direction. It was coming from everywhere. The walls, the aisles, the empty corners of the store. It was all around me, like the building itself was alive. I spun around, my eyes frantically scanning the store. But there was nothing. Just the endless rows of shelves, the soft flickering of lights, and the eerie silence. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracking. There was no answer. The air felt thicker now, like the walls were closing in. I turned back to the doors, my hands shaking as I tried again to push them open. This time, the glass doors moved, but not as they should. They moved inward, slowly, almost like they were bending around me, like the space around me was being distorted. I could feel the ground beneath my feet shift, the building itself warping, expanding, as if it was becoming something else. The air grew colder. I could see my breath. "You shouldn't have come here." The voice again, louder this time, closer. I didn't know what was happening. But it wasn't just the doors that were changing. The space around me was growing. I was being pulled deeper into the store. I couldn't stop it. No matter how much I tried to run, it was like the walls of the store had turned into a labyrinth. Everything felt wrong, and the store wasn't just a place anymore. It was a trap. I tried to steady my breath, my hands shaking as I gripped the handle of the door with all my strength. The walls around me felt like they were bending inward, like the store was closing in on me. The cold air pressed down harder, and I could hear the faintest hum, a sound that wasn't coming from the lights anymore, but from the very walls themselves. I pulled harder on the door. It wouldn't open. It couldn't open. The doors felt like they were alive, resisting my every movement. I could feel the ground shift beneath my feet again, the tiles warping under the pressure. I spun around and stumbled backward, nearly tripping over my own feet as I gazed around the store. It was bigger now. The aisles stretched farther than before, and the shelves seemed to move, shifting ever so slightly. The store wasn't just a building anymore. It had become a maze, a living, breathing thing that changed when I wasn't looking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. It was like I was in a distorted version of the Walmart I had walked into, like I had stepped into a parallel space where the laws of reality no longer applied. I turned to the left, heading down a narrow aisle that hadn't been there before. The shelves were lined with goods, but none of them seemed real. The labels on the cans, the boxes, they were all wrong. None of the brands were familiar. Everything was off, distorted in a way that I couldn't fully comprehend. Then, from further down the aisle, I saw something. Someone. It was a person. Or at least, it looked like a person. I approached cautiously, my heart in my throat. The figure was standing near the end of the aisle, facing away from me. It was a man, tall, with a flannel shirt, just like any normal shopper. But as I got closer, I noticed something strange. The man didn't move, not an inch, and the more I stared at him, the less he looked human. His posture was too stiff, too rigid. His head was tilted at an unnatural angle, almost as if he was frozen mid-motion. I stopped a few feet away from him, unsure what to do. He hadn't acknowledged me. His body was so still, I wondered if he was even alive. But then I heard it, that low, guttural sound, a breath. He exhaled, and the sound didn't come from his mouth. It was a rasping, almost mechanical sound, as if something deep inside his chest was malfunctioning. My skin prickled as I took another step back. I looked up at his face, and that's when I saw it. His eyes, they were completely black. No pupils, no whites, just empty, endless void staring directly into mine. Suddenly, his head snapped toward me with a jerk. The motion was so fast, so unnaturally quick, that I staggered backward, gasping for air. His mouth opened wide, wider than any human's mouth should, and a sound came out that was not a voice but a scream, a low, piercing shriek that echoed throughout the store, reverberating through the walls. I turned and ran, not even bothering to look back. My footsteps pounded against the tile, and my breath was shallow, rapid, as I sprinted down the aisles. I could hear something, footsteps, heavy and uneven, pounding behind me. The noise was growing louder, closer. I rounded a corner and stopped dead in my tracks. The entire store had changed again. The shelves were now twisted crooked, as if the entire space had bent and contorted around me. The aisles seemed to stretch on forever, the end of them lost in the thick shadows that now filled the store. The familiar layout of Walmart was gone, replaced with a nightmarish labyrinth of towering shelves and flickering lights. I stumbled forward, my mind racing. The air was thick, suffocating, and it felt like something was closing in on me, something that was watching, waiting. As I pushed through a set of shelves, trying to find some way out, I heard the voice again. Not a whisper this time, but clear, sharp. You can't leave. You're not supposed to leave. It was coming from everywhere, inside my head, inside the walls. I spun around, but there was no one there, no one in sight. Just the endless, distorted aisles and the strange, growing hum that filled the space around me. I had to get out. I had to. I ran again, pushing past rows and rows of empty shelves. The store seemed to grow more distorted with every step I took. The sound of footsteps behind me wasn't fading. It was getting louder, growing closer, until the very air felt like it was shaking. And then I saw it, the exit. I blinked, unsure if my mind was playing tricks on me, but there it was, the automatic sliding doors, standing wide open just beyond the aisle. The light from the parking lot spilled in, casting long shadows on the floor. Without a second thought, I bolted for the door, my legs aching, my chest tight with fear. But as I reached the doors, they slammed shut, blocking my path. I hit them with both hands, my palms slamming against the glass. They didn't budge. The world outside was there, just beyond the glass, but I was stuck, trapped, The doors were solid, locked. I turned around, panting, and that's when I saw it. The man from the aisle was standing at the far end of the store. His eyes locked onto mine again, his face contorted into a grin that was far too wide, stretching across his face like it was made of something that shouldn't exist. "You belong here now." I backed away, my heart pounding in my chest. But no matter where I went, the space around me grew darker, tighter. The store wasn't just a store anymore. It was a prison, a trap, and I was never going to leave. Before we continue, let me ask you something strange. Have you ever felt like someone was standing just outside your field of vision? Not close enough to see, but close enough to feel? Would you even know if something had been following you? Quietly for days? This next story might make you wonder about that a little more than you'd like. Lent is a time of devotion, a season of sacrifice and spiritual cleansing. For 40 days, believers fast, reflect, and seek to grow closer to God. But what if I told you that the sacred period also has a dark side? Old traditions whisper of something else happening during these 40 days, something beyond fasting and prayer. A thinning of the veil between this world and the next. There are stories of people who ignored the warnings, who broke the ancient rules without realizing that those traditions were not just about faith, but about protection. Because during Lent, something unseen watches. And sometimes it reaches out. Story 1, the Midnight Fast. Mariana had always followed the Lenten traditions strictly. Every year, she fasted, avoided meat on Fridays, and spent time in prayer. But that year, something was different. It started with the dreams. Every night, she found herself walking down a long, endless hallway. The walls stretched impossibly high, their surfaces smooth and black, absorbing all light. A cold, suffocating silence filled the air, and behind her, a presence. She could never see it, never hear it, but she felt it, watching, waiting. Every time she woke up, it was the same. 3 a.m. Her room was always ice cold, her body drenched in sweat. At first, she thought it was just her mind playing tricks on her. Maybe stress, maybe just bad dreams. But then, the hunger came. It started as a dull ache in her stomach, just before bed. Then it became a deep, gnawing pain, an insatiable craving that grew stronger every night. By the second week of Lent, she could barely sleep. No matter how much she ate during the day, she always woke up starving. And on the night it happened, she couldn't fight it anymore. She crept out of bed, her stomach twisting painfully as she made her way to the kitchen. The house was silent. Still, the kind of silence that made her ears ring. As she opened the fridge, a shiver ran down her spine. It felt like someone was behind her. She turned. Nothing. With shaking hands, she grabbed a piece of bread, convincing herself that one small bite wouldn't matter. But the moment she put it in her mouth, the kitchen lights flickered. A wave of cold air rushed over her, raising goosebumps along her arms. Then, a sound, a slow, deliberate clicking on the floor, like nails tapping against tile. Not footsteps, not breathing, something else. The sound came from the hallway, just out of sight. Click, click, click. Mariana froze, her body paralyzed by an instinctual fear. She forced herself to turn her head slightly, just enough to see the hallway reflected in the kitchen window. And that's when she saw it. A shape, tall, too tall, motionless. Its head was tilted at an unnatural angle, as if listening. Then it moved, not like a person, not like anything living. A slow, jerking shift closer. The clicking on the floor stopped, and in a voice that was not human, you broke the fast. The whisper slithered through the air, soft and guttural, spoken from somewhere too deep in the shadows. The bread fell from Mariana's fingers. She didn't breathe, didn't blink. Then the kitchen lights cut out completely. The darkness swallowed everything. Mariana stumbled backward, her pulse hammering so hard she thought it would burst. She ran, blindly, desperately, back to her room, slamming the door shut and locking it. She didn't move, didn't sleep, didn't dare to breathe too loudly. Outside her door, the floor creaked, and then, slowly, agonizingly, the handle turned, but it didn't open. Something was on the other side, waiting. By sunrise, it was gone. But Mariana never ate after midnight again, because she knew now the fast wasn't just about discipline. It was about protection. And whatever had come for her that night was still out there. Story 2, the ashes on the doorstep. Santiago was not a superstitious man. He went to church when he had to, observed like everyone else in his small town, but never took it too seriously. The stories about spirits roaming freely during this time? Nonsense. The warnings about not disrespecting the season? Just old traditions meant to scare people into behaving. So when Ash Wednesday arrived and his grandmother told him to put a line of blessed ashes at his doorstep to keep things from entering, he only laughed. If something wants to come in, Abuela, a little dust won't stop it. She didn't laugh. Then may God protect you, Mijo, she muttered. That night, the wind howled through the trees outside his small house, rattling the windows. The air felt heavy, thick with something unseen. He locked the doors, shut the curtains, went to bed like any other night. Then at 3:12 a.m., a knock at the door. Slow, deliberate. Santiago shot up in bed, heart hammering. No one visited this late, not in this town. The knock came again. He crept toward the door, hesitating. He didn't turn on the lights, just peeked through the peephole. No one was there. The street outside was empty, bathed in the dim glow of the street lamp. Then, a whisper, "Let me in," right next to his ear. Santiago stumbled back, heart slamming against his ribs. The voice had been close, too close, but there was no one there. He reached for his phone, hand shaking. No signal. Then he heard it, not from the door, from the window, the sound of fingernails dragging slowly against the glass. His stomach turned ice cold. He didn't want to look. He knew he shouldn't look. But something inside him, something not his own, made him turn his head. And there it was, a shadow pressed against the window, taller than the frame. No eyes, no mouth, just a dark, featureless shape with hands that were too long, fingers tapping against the glass in a slow, rhythmic pattern. Then, without moving, without opening a mouth, it spoke. "Why didn't you mark your door?" The words slithered into his mind like cold fingers. Santiago bolted to his room, locked the door, and curled beneath the covers like a terrified child. The tapping continued. For hours. Just before sunrise, it stopped. When he finally found the courage to open his door, a pile of ashes sat on his doorstep. But they weren't the ones his grandmother had told him to place there. These were black and warm, like something had burned them there. Santiago never mocked his grandmother's warnings again. And every year since, when Ash Wednesday arrives, he makes sure to mark his door, because he knows now something waits during Lent, and it's always looking for the ones who don't follow the rules. Story 3. The church that should have been empty. Gabriel had never missed a Sunday Mass in his life. Growing up in a deeply religious family, he was taught to respect sacred places, especially during Lent. His grandmother used to say that the devil worked hardest during these 40 days, tempting, whispering, looking for cracks in people's faith. But Gabriel didn't believe in superstitions. He believed in God, in prayers, and the strength of the church. And then one night, he learned that not everything inside a church is holy. It was the 4th week of Lent. The church in his town remained open for night prayers, and Gabriel had volunteered to lock up after the last visitors left. By midnight, the building was empty, or at least it should have been. He moved through the aisles, checking each pew, making sure no one lingered. The dim glow of candles flickered against the stained glass windows, casting long, distorted shadows across the stone walls. The silence was heavy, almost too heavy. As he approached the altar, he felt it, a shift in the air, like something had just stepped inside. A soft creak echoed from the back of the church. Gabriel turned sharply. The doors were still shut. The pews were still empty. But then, a whisper, a voice, barely audible, coming from the confession booth. "Forgive me, Father, for I have sinned." Gabriel's blood turned to ice. The booth was empty. He knew it was empty. He had checked it himself. The whisper came again. "I said, forgive me." Slowly, carefully, Gabriel stepped toward the booth. The wooden door was slightly ajar, revealing only darkness inside. His hand trembled as he reached out, and then the door slammed shut. The candles blew out. The church was plunged into suffocating darkness. And then, right next to his ear, "You're not the priest." Gabriel stumbled back. His breath caught in his throat. The whisper had come from inside the booth, but the door hadn't moved. Then, a deep, slow exhale, coming from the other side of the confessional screen. Something was in there, waiting. The wooden panel between them creaked as something pressed against it. Too large, too heavy to be human. The air filled with the scent of something rotten, like old, damp earth and decaying flowers. Gabriel bolted for the doors. As he ran, the whispers followed him, overlapping voices, some pleading, some laughing, some mocking. "Stay, stay, stay." He didn't stop. He didn't look back. When he finally burst outside, the night air burned his lungs. He turned, expecting to see nothing. The church was dark and silent again, as if nothing had happened. But when he returned the next morning with the priest, they found the confessional booth's wooden screen, shredded, deep claw marks carved through the wood, and inside on the floor, a single blackened crucifix. Gabriel never stayed in the church alone after that, because now he knew not every prayer spoken during Lent is meant for God. Story 4. The procession that never ended. Elena grew up hearing stories about the procession to Las Almas, the procession of lost souls. Her grandmother used to warn her, if you hear the sound of a procession at night during Lent, do not look, do not follow, and whatever you do, do not join. It was an old tale, something passed down in whispers, but no one really believed it, not until Elena saw it for herself. It was the last Friday of Lent. The village was quiet, the streets empty, the night thick with eerie stillness. She had stayed late at a friend's house, helping prepare for the upcoming Holy Week celebrations. By the time she left, the air was cold, the scent of burning candles and incense lingering from the church. Then, the faint sound of bells, distant, echoing through the empty streets. She stopped, A procession at this hour? That made no sense. Then came the chanting, low, rhythmic, voices murmuring prayers in a language she couldn't quite understand. Her heart began to race. She turned a corner, and there they were, a long procession of people, dressed in dark robes, walking slowly through the main street. Each one held a candle, the flames barely flickering despite the wind. At the front, a figure carried a massive wooden cross. Elena's breath caught in her throat. Something was wrong. The robes looked old, tattered, almost like funeral shrouds, and the faces beneath the hoods. There were none, just darkness, hollow voids where eyes and mouths should have been. Then one of them turned its head toward her. No eyes, no face, yet she felt it looking at her. A wave of cold ran through her body. The figure raised its hand, beckoning. She stepped back, her instinct screaming at her to run. Then she noticed something even worse. The ground beneath the procession. They weren't walking on the cobblestone street. They were walking above it. Their feet never touched the ground. She stumbled backward, her hands shaking. And that's when the last figure in the procession whispered, "Walk with us." Her vision blurred. The world around her tilted. For a second, she almost did it, almost stepped forward. Then a bell rang from the church. The procession flickered, like smoke dissolving in the wind. Gone. Elena collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. By the time she made it home, she was shaking so badly she could barely lock the door. She told her grandmother what happened the next morning. The old woman's face went pale. "You saw them," she whispered. Elena nodded. Her grandmother placed a small vial of holy water in her hands. "You must be careful, Mija, because once you see the procession to Las Almas—" She swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "They will see you too." That was the last night Elena ever walked alone during Lent, because now she knew some processions never end, and some souls never rest. Just a moment before the next story. Have you been sleeping well lately? No strange dreams? No shadows moving just before you open your eyes? Sometimes the stories we hear at night find their way into the dark corners of our minds. Let's see what this next one leaves behind when the screen goes black. Before we head into the next story, can I ask you something? When was the last time you heard a noise in your house and ignored it? Do you remember what it sounded like? A creak, a knock, a whisper? Sometimes we brush off what we're not ready to face. Let's hope that's not the case with this next story. The backwoods of rural Texas are unlike anywhere else in the country, far from the bustling cities and highways. It's a place where the land feels heavy with history, and the air is thick with secrets. But not everyone who ventures into these parts comes back with just stories of beauty and nature. Some return with tales that will haunt them forever. It was supposed to be a quiet weekend getaway for three friends, Jake, Mason, and Sam. They had heard stories about the old, forgotten cabin deep in the woods, a place so isolated that even the locals wouldn't venture near it. Intrigued by the idea of escaping the world and living off the grid for a few days, they packed up their gear and drove out to the backwoods, ready to enjoy the silence and solitude. As they turned off the main road and drove further into the thick forest, the air grew heavier, the trees closer together, their branches twisting above them like gnarled fingers. The sun was starting to set, casting long shadows across the road, but there was still enough light for them to see the rugged terrain that lay ahead. After hours of winding through the woods, they finally reached the cabin. It was small, weathered, and looked like it hadn't been touched in years. The wood was dark, and the porch creaked as they stepped onto it, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. "It's perfect," Jake said with a grin, unpacking his gear. But the others weren't so sure. Mason and Sam exchanged uneasy glances, sensing something was off. They'd been to many remote places before, but this felt different. The cabin, tucked so far from civilization, seemed to be holding something, a presence, beneath its cracked walls. That night, as the wind howled through the trees, the three friends sat around a fire, roasting marshmallows and sharing stories. But as the flames flickered, the sounds of forest around them began to change. At first, it was subtle, a rustling in the trees, a branch cracking in the distance. But soon, it grew louder, more distinct. There was something out there, moving through the woods, moving closer. Sam was the first to hear it. "You hear that?" he asked, his voice low. They all stopped talking, straining to listen. At first, it sounded like footsteps, slow, deliberate, like someone was walking through the underbrush. But no one had arrived. There were no other cars on the road, no sign of anyone else out here. "It's just an animal," Jake said, trying to reassure the group. But the uneasy feeling in his chest told him otherwise. The footsteps stopped, but the silence that followed felt wrong, unnaturally still, as though the entire forest was holding its breath. Then, in the distance, they heard a voice, a whisper, "Help!" The voice was soft, distant, and carried on the wind. It wasn't loud enough for them to make out the words clearly, but it was unmistakable. Someone or something was out there, trying to reach them. A shiver ran down Jake's spine, and he stood up quickly, grabbing a flashlight from the table. "I'm going to check it out," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "No, don't," Sam protested, his face pale. "We need to stay here. Something's not right." But Jake was already moving toward the woods. The flashlight beam sliced through the darkness, illuminating only the trees and the underbrush. The air had grown colder, and the rustling in the trees grew louder, as if something was circling the cabin, watching them. Jake walked deeper into the woods, the beam of light flickering with each step he took. He called out, his voice trembling, "Hello? Is someone out there?" He didn't get an answer, but something watched him. Suddenly, the beam of the flashlight caught a glimpse of something in the distance, something tall and shadowy, standing motionless between the trees. He couldn't make out what it was, but it was there, just beyond the edge of the light. Jake's heart began to race as he took a step closer, his breath coming in shallow gasps. He was almost there, just a few feet away from whatever was standing in the shadows. And then, without warning, the figure vanished. Jake froze, his flashlight illuminating nothing but trees and shadows. He stepped back quickly, his heart pounding in his chest. What was that? What had he seen? A voice, distant but clear, echoed in his mind. "You shouldn't have come." Jake spun around, but there was no one behind him, only the empty, dark woods. He hurried back to the cabin, his pulse racing. When he reached the fire pit, Sam and Mason were waiting, their faces filled with fear. "What happened?" Sam asked urgently. "I don't know," Jake replied, his voice shaking. "There's something out there. Something not right." They all sat in silence, the fire crackling between them, but the feeling of being watched never left. The wind picked up again, and with it came the sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, circling the cabin. They weren't alone anymore. The footsteps continued, growing louder and closer, like the rhythm of something, approaching from all sides. It was as though the very earth around them was alive, the crunch of the leaves and twigs underfoot marking the presence of whatever was moving just beyond the reach of the firelight. Mason stood up first, his body rigid with fear. We need to leave. Now. Jake and Sam exchanged looks, but neither moved. Something told them they weren't going to make it out of these woods tonight. Not with whatever was out there. The tension in the air was thick, oppressive, suffocating. It felt as though the very woods were closing in on them, the trees stretching their limbs toward the cabin like hands ready to pull them into the dark. "Stay calm," Jake said, his voice shaking, though he was trying to remain steady. "We need to stick together." But even as the words left his mouth, the silence between the footsteps became unbearable. The air around them grew colder, the kind of cold that gnawed at the edges of your mind and made you question your own thoughts. Suddenly, a shadow darted past the edge of the cabin, just outside the flickering light of the fire. It was fast, too fast. Sam jumped, his heart racing. What the hell was that? Jake and Mason were already moving toward the door, their eyes darting to every corner, every crack in the dark. The whispering voice from earlier returned, louder this time, closer. It wasn't just a whisper now. It was like a chant, low and guttural, blending with the wind. "You shouldn't have come." The words echoed again and again, now more like a command than a warning. The air around them seemed to tremble with every syllable. "Let's go," Mason finally shouted, grabbing his bag and heading for the door. But as soon as he opened it, the air outside rushed in, a bone-chilling wind that smelt faintly of rot and decay. The once crisp scent of the forest had turned sour, thick with an unnatural stench. The forest beyond wasn't as they had left it. The trees were darker now, twisted, their trunks gnarled into shapes that seemed almost human. And in the distance, there was movement, not animals, not the wind, but something far worse. A figure, tall and gaunt, emerged from the shadows of the trees, walking toward the cabin. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as if it had all the time in the world to approach them. But its eyes, those eyes, glowed faintly in the dark, reflecting an unnatural light, flickering like dying embers. The figure was nothing human. It had no shape, no solid form. It seemed to shift and bend as it moved, like a shadow stretched too far. The more they stared, the less real it seemed, as though it existed in the space between reality and nightmare. Jake's breath caught in his throat, his body frozen in fear. We need to get out of here," he whispered, though he wasn't sure where they could go. But just as he was about to run, a cold voice pierced through the air, so clear and sharp it felt like ice cutting through his skin. "You cannot leave." The figure's form rippled, stretching unnaturally, and then it was gone. One moment it stood in the clearing, and the next it had vanished without a trace. The air stood still and the footsteps stopped. But they hadn't left. The ground beneath them trembled, shaking violently like an earthquake. But there was no rumble, no crashing of buildings. Just the ground moving in a way that made no sense. They felt it in their feet, in their bones, like the earth itself was shifting and changing. "Where is it?" Sam whispered, his voice cracking as he looked around, panicking. "Where is it?" The wind picked up again, and then, as suddenly as it had stopped, the whispering returned. But this time it wasn't just a voice. It was many voices, all speaking in unison, each one carrying a different message, all blending together in a maddening chorus. "You shouldn't have come. You shouldn't have come." The ground beneath their feet cracked open, wide enough to swallow them whole. Suddenly, the fire flickered violently, sending an eerie light across the cabin, and for a split second they saw something moving in the shadows at the edges of firelight, crawling toward them. A figure? No, something else. It had too many limbs, too many eyes, and it moved in a way that was wrong. It didn't walk. It slithered like it was part of the earth itself. Run. Jake screamed, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't wait for the others. He bolted for the door, pushing past Mason and Sam, as the sound of something chasing them filled the air. They ran through the woods, stumbling over rocks and branches, the sound of something behind them, heavy, unnatural, fast, growing louder with each step. They didn't dare look back. They couldn't. They just had to get out. But the forest seemed endless. The trees reached out like claws, grabbing at their limbs. The ground beneath them shook again, and they felt the presence of whatever was hunting them grow closer, the air thick with its malice. And then, just when they thought they might make it out, the darkness swallowed them. The darkness seemed to close in around them, suffocating, pressing in from all sides. The forest that had once been so vast, so inviting, now felt like a prison. Every step they took through the brush, every branch that snapped beneath their feet, felt like a countdown, marking the time they had left. Jake, Mason, and Sam ran blindly, their hearts pounding in their chests. They had no idea where they were going anymore. The path that led them here had disappeared, swallowed by the dense trees and the unnatural darkness. The night was thick, like a black curtain that cut off all light and sound. There was no moon, no stars, just an oppressive, suffocating void. The sound of their frantic footsteps echoed through the forest, but there was another sound that followed, a low, rhythmic thudding, like something large was moving behind them, getting closer with each passing second. It was coming for them. Sam's breath came in ragged gasps as he stumbled, his leg catching on a root. He fell to the ground, his palms scraping the dirt as he tried to push himself up. "We can't outrun it," he gasped, his voice barely audible. "It's too fast." Jake turned, his face pale with fear. He grabbed Sam's arm, pulling him to his feet. "We have to keep moving. We have no choice." But before they could take another step, the thudding stopped. A deep, heavy silence filled the air, so complete that it felt like the entire world had gone still. And then they heard it, the sound of breathing. It wasn't the labored, terrified breathing of someone running through the woods. No, this was different. It was slow, steady, like something stalking them, breathing through a mouth far too wide, far too deep. It was too unnatural to be human, too guttural to belong to any creature they had ever known. And it was right behind them. Mason turned around, his flashlight trembling in his hand. The beam cut through the darkness, but all it revealed were trees. No creature, no shadow, just the forest stretching endlessly around them. But the breathing didn't stop. "Turn it off." Sam hissed. "It'll see us." Jake's breath caught in his throat as he glanced back into the darkness, his heart racing. He felt it then, the weight of eyes upon him, watching, waiting. A shape moved in the distance. At first, it was just a blur, something too fast to fully comprehend. But then it stopped, right at the edge of the light, just beyond the reach of their flashlights. The figure was tall, too tall, its limbs unnaturally long and thin, with hands that seemed to hang down too low. Its skin was pale, stretched tight over a frame that looked almost skeletal. But its eyes were what froze them in place. They were wide, black, and unblinking, empty, hollow. The creature tilted its head slightly, as if observing them, studying them. And then, as if it had made some terrible decision, it stepped forward. One slow, deliberate step. It was enough to snap them out of their frozen stupor. Without a word, they turned and ran again, pushing through the trees, desperate to escape, But the creature was faster than they could have imagined. It moved with a speed that shouldn't have been possible. Its long limbs stretched out like whips, crashing through the underbrush, closing the distance between them with each pulse of its unnatural speed. Sam let out a strangled cry as something grabbed his ankle, yanking him off the ground. He was dragged backward, his fingers scraping against the dirt as he tried to claw his way free. Jake reached for him, but before he could grab hold, a shadow lunged from the darkness, grabbing Sam's arm and pulling him further into the blackness. "No! Sam!" Jake screamed, but it was no use. The creature had him. Mason froze, his face filled with terror as he turned toward Jake, his eyes wide with disbelief. "We can't, he's gone." But Jake wouldn't listen. He couldn't. He was already moving, pulling Mason along, running toward the only thing that could save them, the clearing where they had parked their truck. They had to get to the truck. They had to. But as they reached the edge of the woods, the air around them turned ice cold. The temperature dropped so suddenly that their breath fogged in the air. The truck's headlights flickered in the distance, but something was wrong. The truck wasn't where they had left it. It had moved. They stopped in their tracks. The truck was facing them now, its engine off, but the headlights were on, shining into the forest. The doors were wide open, as if someone had left in a hurry, and standing in front of it, under the bright light, was the creature. It was tall, impossibly tall, and its mouth stretched wide, too wide. Its black eyes glowed in the headlights, and it didn't move. It just stood there, waiting, and then the voice came again, the one from earlier. "You shouldn't have come." Jake's stomach turned. He felt his knees weaken, but he didn't dare turn away. The creature was waiting, watching, hungry. It wasn't just watching them. It had been waiting for them to come here all along. The creature's wide, black eyes fixed on them, unblinking, unfeeling, as if it had all the time in the world. The stillness was unnerving, like the calm before a storm, and every part of Jake's body screamed for him to move, to run. But his legs were frozen, heavy with fear, rooted in place like the trees around him. Mason was the first to break the silence, his voice tight with panic. "What the hell is that thing?" Jake didn't answer. He couldn't. All he could do was stare at it, the figure standing in the glow of the headlights. It was too inhuman, too wrong, its form stretching and bending in ways that no living thing could. The thing that stood before them wasn't just some lost animal or deranged person. No, this was something ancient, something primal. The air around them grew colder, sharper, as if the very atmosphere had been infected by its presence. The wind whispered through the trees, a distant howl. But the air was thick with something else, a presence that clung to the earth, something that had been there long before the first settlers, long before even the trees had grown. Jake's breath caught in his throat as the creature took a step forward. The ground beneath it seemed to ripple, as if it was part of the land itself, part of the darkness that filled the space. It moved not with speed, but with an unnatural grace, its limbs stretching and retracting as if it was bending reality around it. Then, without warning, it spoke. "You shouldn't have come here. This is my place." The voice was low, guttural, like the earth itself was speaking through it. It was more of a growl than anything that could be called a word. The sound reverberated in Jake's bones, sending a tremor through his entire body. It wasn't just a voice, it was a command, a warning. The creature wasn't merely speaking, it was controlling. Jake's heart raced as the figure moved again, this time closer, taking another step into the light. And as it did, something else appeared in the darkness. Another figure, and another. At first, Jake thought it was his mind playing tricks on him. But no, there were more of them. Tall, shadowy figures, their forms twisted, their limbs bent in impossible angles, crawling out from the very darkness itself. They surrounded them, encircling them, their hollow eyes glowing faintly in the headlights. "Run, Jake! Run!" Mason screamed, grabbing his arm. Jake didn't need any more encouragement. He tore his eyes away from the figures and sprinted toward the truck, Mason close behind him, but the air seemed to slow them down. It was as if the darkness was thickening, fighting against them, keeping them trapped. Every step felt like wading through deep water. They reached the truck, but before they could get inside, the creature spoke again, its voice filling the air around them. "You will never leave." A cold hand grasped Jake's shoulder, pulling him back with a force he couldn't resist. He spun around, his heart pounding in his ears, but what he saw was worse than anything he had imagined. One of the figures was right behind him, its face twisted in a grotesque smile, its mouth stretching wide, revealing teeth like jagged rocks. It moved closer, its breath cold and fetid against the skin. "No!" Jake shouted, struggling to break free, but it was too strong. The thing was too strong. Mason reached for him, but just as his hand brushed Jake's arm, the air shuddered, and the creature that held Jake let out a low, mocking laugh. The sound vibrated through the truck, shaking the very air around them. The ground beneath their feet cracked open, the earth splitting wide. A pit, black as pitch, appeared in front of the truck, pulling everything toward it. The truck's tires screeched as it was pulled closer to the edge. The black abyss below seemed endless, pulling at their very souls, threatening to swallow them whole. The creature's smile widened as it leaned in close to Jake, its breath cold against his face. "This is where you belong now." In that moment, the world seemed to stop. Time hung suspended in the air like a breath held too long. Jake could feel his body growing weak, his mind clouded by the creature's presence. He tried to scream, tried to fight, but the energy in the air drained him, leaving him paralyzed. And then, just as the darkness seemed to consume everything, the sound of metal twisting filled the air. The truck's engine roared to life, and the vehicle lurched forward, pulling free from the creature's grip. It was Mason. He had jumped into the driver's seat, his hands shaking as he slammed his foot on the accelerator. "Gio!" he screamed, his voice barely a whisper. Jake, his mind reeling, managed to pull himself away from the creature's grasp. He stumbled into the truck, and Mason floored the gas pedal, speeding down the road with nothing but the headlights to guide them. The woods around them blurred, the trees and shadows passing in a wild rush. They didn't look back. They couldn't. But even as they drove, the air felt heavy, thick with the presence of something behind them, chasing them, waiting for them to stop. Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had followed them into the woods, whatever had been watching them, wasn't finished yet. And neither were they. The truck sped to the backwoods, its headlights barely cutting through the darkness as the trees whipped by in a blur. The engine roared, but it sounded hollow, as if the truck itself was being pulled by something far stronger than the power beneath the hood. Jake could still feel the presence, that thing trailing them, watching them as they fled. Mason gripped the steering wheel, his knuckles white. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cold air rushing in through the open window. He kept his eyes fixed on the road ahead, but every so often he would glance in the rearview mirror, his face tightening in horror. "They're still there," he muttered, his voice shaky. "I can feel them." Jake, still catching his breath, glanced over at Mason, trying to keep his panic in check. "What do you mean? I thought we got away." Bam! A deafening thud echoed from the back of the truck. Like something large had collided with it. The truck lurched violently, almost throwing them from their seats. Mason swerved, his heart racing, but the truck remained steady as he fought to keep control. What was that? Mason gasped, his eyes wide with terror. He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed the gas pedal down harder, the engine whining as they sped even faster into the night. Jake turned around, his heart pounding as his eyes scanned the darkness behind them. There was nothing at first, just the endless expanse of trees, shadows stretching far into the distance. But then, in the distance, he saw it again. A shadow, a figure. It was moving, not running, not walking, but floating, gliding over the ground with unnatural speed, its long limbs stretching impossibly, its eyes glowing like embers. It was too fast. It was catching up with them. They're not human. Jake shouted, fear consuming him. We have to do something. We can't outrun it. Mason's grip tightened on the wheel, his face pale. There's nowhere to go. We're trapped. The truck rumbled over a dirt road, its tires kicking up dust, but the further they drove, the more the road seemed to twist and turn into unfamiliar paths. The trees around them felt like they were closing in, the darkness pushing in from all sides, as if the forest itself was trying to swallow them whole. And then came the voice. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was louder, more distinct, filling their minds as though it were inside them. You shouldn't have come. You can't leave. Jake's skin crawled, his heartbeat hammering in his chest. His head throbbed from the force of the voice. It wasn't just words. It was a command, a presence pressing in on him from all sides, like a weight on his soul. Mason slammed his foot on the brake, sending the truck screeching to a halt. The sudden stop left them both gasping for breath, the screech of the tires echoing in the stillness. But the sound of their racing hearts drowned out all other noise. The forest was silent now, too silent. Jake's eyes darted around, searching the shadows. But there was nothing, no creature, no movement, only the faint, eerie hum of the wind through the trees. It stopped, Jake whispered, half in disbelief. Mason nodded, sweat dripping down his face. I don't care. I'm getting out of here. But just as Mason reached for the door handle, the truck jerked forward, as if someone had grabbed it, pulling them back into the forest. Bam! The impact hit again, this time much harder. The force of it made the truck rock violently, almost tipping over. Both of them screamed as the world around them spun. And then, through the dust and the panic, Jake saw it. It was standing outside the truck now. The creature. Its limbs were stretched far too long, twisted and contorted, bending in ways that were not natural. Its head tilted unervingly, as if studying them, watching their every move. The creature's glowing eyes stared directly into theirs, its mouth curling into an unholy smile that made the air around them feel colder, thicker, as if the very atmosphere had turned against them. The world around them went still. The trees around the truck groaned, the wind howling in a way that felt unnatural, like something was about to break free. It wasn't just watching them anymore. It was closing in. We have to fight back, Mason said, his voice shaking with fear. Do you have anything? Jake's eyes darted around the truck, his mind racing. There was nothing they could use to defend themselves against that. But then he saw it, a flare. It was tucked into the side compartment, a last resort signal for help, just in case they needed to be found. He didn't think. He grabbed it, yanking the pin and igniting the flare. The bright red light shot out, casting an eerie glow across the forest. The creature recoiled, stepping back from the light, its skin hissing and sizzling as if the very light burned it. It screeched, no, howled, a sound so horrible, so filled with rage, that it felt like the earth itself was crying out in agony. The flare sputtered, its light flickering. But the creature had already retreated into the darkness, its shadowy form fading back into the woods. Jake and Mason sat in the truck, staring out into the night, panting and trembling. The flare burned out, leaving them in the cold darkness again, the silence more suffocating than before. It was gone for now, but they both knew it wouldn't stay away forever. The truck sat in the dead silence of the woods, the glow from the dying flare casting flickering shadows against the trees. Jake and Mason could hardly breathe, their hearts still racing from the encounter. The air felt wrong, thick and oppressive, like the entire forest was holding its breath, waiting for the next moment. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. The fear that hung between them was enough to fill the air. Mason finally broke the silence, his voice hoarse. "It's not over. We have to leave now." Jake nodded, his hand still trembling on the steering wheel. He had no intention of staying, no matter how much the truck had been compromised or how distant the road seemed. They couldn't outrun whatever had been hunting them, and they knew it. But as Mason reached the door, the ground beneath them shuddered again, and the truck lurched forward, as if something beneath it had moved, pushed it. The headlights flickered, and then went out, plunging them into darkness. Before they could react, the unmistakable growl returned, deep and rumbling, vibrating the very air around them. It was too close now, too loud, too hungry. The truck rocked on its suspension, and suddenly everything felt smaller, closer. The creature was right outside now, not in the shadows anymore. It was here. Jake reached for the door, but before he could open it, the forest seemed to close in. The trees, their twisted forms reaching down from above, had crowded them in, blocking any chance of escape. The world outside had become a void, a pit of pure darkness. "You're not going anywhere," the voice came again, but this time it wasn't distant. It was inside their heads, inside their bones. Then the truck door slammed shut on its own, as if an unseen hand had forcefully shut it, trapping them in the suffocating air. A cold breeze flooded the cabin, though the windows were sealed tight. The whispering came again, faint at first, but quickly building in volume. It was everywhere, filling the air, making it harder to breathe. Each whisper was like a hook digging into their minds, pulling them deeper into the madness. "You've come to stay with us. Forever." Jake's fingers fumbled for the ignition, but it was no use. The truck wouldn't start. The engine was dead, the battery drained as if the creature had sucked the life from the vehicle itself. Mason slammed his fist against the dashboard in frustration. And then it appeared. The figure, the thing, was standing at the very edge of the headlights now. Tall, skeletal, its form impossible to comprehend. Its limbs twisted in unnatural angles, and its eyes, they were no longer black. Now, they glowed a deep, fiery red, flickering like flames in the distance. With a hiss, the thing took a step forward, its long arms extending unnaturally, its fingers stretching toward the truck. The skin of its face seemed to split open in a grotesque smile, revealing jagged, broken teeth. The air seemed to warp as it moved closer, distorting the space around it. Jake's heart pounded, his hands frozen on the steering wheel. But Mason, fueled by fear and desperation, yanked open the door and bolted into the night. Mason, no. Jake screamed, but it was too late. Mason was already running, his footsteps echoing into the trees, the sound fading as he vanished into the night. Jake couldn't move. He couldn't breathe. The creature was closing in, its figure growing larger in the light, its mouth stretching wide, ready to consume him whole. Then, with a sudden burst of adrenaline, Jake grabbed the truck's gear shift and slammed it into reverse. The tires squealed against the dirt, and for a brief moment, the truck lurched backward, moving away from the creature. The headlights caught the shape of Mason, running blindly through the trees, but there was no time to go after him. Jake had to escape, but the forest around him seemed to close in, the trees narrowing into a corridor, blocking every exit. The truck was going nowhere. No matter how much Jake tried to accelerate, the engine stalled. The tires spun hopelessly in place. A hand, the hand of the creature, slammed down on the hood of the truck with force that shook the entire vehicle. Jake screamed, trying to push himself out of the seat, but it was no use. The thing's mouth opened wide, impossibly wide, its jaw unhinging in a way no living thing could. It let out a roar that felt like it came from deep inside the earth, shaking the truck, rattling his very soul. And then, as quickly as it had come, the creature stopped. The truck jerked forward suddenly, breaking free of the creature's grip. The engine roared back to life, the headlights flickering back on. Jake didn't look back. He slammed the pedal to the floor, the truck tearing through the woods, dodging trees and branches, the roaring engine filling the air. The forest blurred around him, but there was no time to stop, no time to think. He didn't dare stop until he reached the main road, until the lights of the distant town shone on the horizon. But even as he passed the last tree line, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that something was still out there, something that had followed him from the woods, something that wouldn't stop until it had what it wanted. And maybe, just maybe, it had already gotten what it needed.